11. The Plain of Kawar. About an hour before sundown we at last, to my unbounded gratitude, emerged from the great belt of marsh onto land that swelled upwards in a succession of rolling waves. Just on the hither side of the crest of the first wave we halted for the night. My first act was to examine Leo's condition. It was, if anything, worse than in the morning, and a new and very distressing feature, vomiting, set in and continued till dawn. Not one wink of sleep did I get that night, for I passed it in assisting Ustane, who was one of the most gentle and indefatigable nurses I ever saw, to wait upon Leo and Job. However, the air here was warm and genial without being too hot, and there were no mosquitoes to speak of. Also we were above the level of the marsh mist, which lay stretched beneath us like the dim smoke pall over a city, lit up here and there by the wandering globes of fire. Thus it will be seen that we were, speaking comparatively, in clover. By dawn on the following morning Leo was quite light-headed, and fancied that he was divided into halves. I was dreadfully distressed, and began to wonder with a sort of sick fear what the end of the attack would be. Alas! I had heard but too much of how these attacks generally terminate. As I was wondering, Bilali came up and said that we must be getting on, more especially as, in his opinion, if Leo did not reach some spot where he could be quiet, and have proper nursing, within the next 12 hours, his life would only be a matter of a day or two. I could not but agree with him, so we got Leo into the litter, and started on, Ustane walking by his side to keep the flies off him, and see that he did not throw himself out onto the ground. Within half an hour of sunrise we had reached the top of the rise of which I have spoken, and a most beautiful view broke upon our gaze. Beneath us was a rich stretch of country, verdant with grass and lovely with foliage and flowers. In the background, at a distance, so far as I could judge, of some 18 miles from where we then stood, a huge and extraordinary mountain rose abruptly from the plain. The base of this great mountain appeared to consist of a grassy slope, but rising from this, I should say, from subsequent observation, at a height of about 500 feet above the level of the plain, was a most tremendous and absolutely precipitous wall of bare rock, quite 12 or 1500 feet in height. The shape of the mountain, which was undoubtedly of volcanic origin, was round, and of course, as only a segment of its circle was visible, it was difficult to estimate its exact size, which was enormous. I afterwards discovered that it could not cover less than 50 square miles of ground. Anything more grand and imposing than the sight presented by this great natural castle, starting in solitary grandeur from the level of the plain, I never saw, and I suppose I never shall. Its very solitude added to its majesty, and its towering cliffs seemed to kiss the sky. Indeed, generally speaking, they were clothed in clouds that lay in fleecy masses upon their broad and level battlements. I sat up in my hammock and gazed out across the plain at this thrilling and majestic sight, and I suppose that Bilali noticed it, for he brought his litter alongside. "Behold the house of she who must be obeyed," he said. "Had ever a queen such a throne before?" "It is wonderful, my father," I answered. "But how do we enter? Those cliffs look hard to climb." "Thou shalt see, my baboon. Look now at the path below us. What thinkest thou that it is? Thou art a wise man. Come tell me." I looked, and saw what appeared to be the line of roadway running straight towards the base of the mountain, though it was covered with turf. There were high banks on each side of it, broken here and there, but fairly continuous on the whole, the meaning of which I did not understand. It seemed so very odd that anybody should embank a roadway. "Well, my father," I answered, "I suppose that it is a road, otherwise I should have been inclined to say that it was the bed of a river, or rather," I added, observing the extraordinary directness of the cutting, "of a canal." Bilali, who, by the way, was none the worse for his immersion of the day before, nodded his head sagely as he replied, "Thou art right, my son. It is a channel cut out by those who were before us in this place to carry away water. Of this I am sure. Within the rocky circle of the mountain whither we journey was once a great lake. But those who were before us, by wonderful arts of which I know not, hewed a path for the water through the solid rock of the mountain, piercing even to the bed of the lake. But first they cut the channel that thou sayest across the plain. Then, when at last the water burst out, it rushed down the channel that had been made to receive it, and crossed this plain till it reached the low land behind the rise, and there, perchance, it made the swamp through which we have come. Then when the lake was drained dry, The people whereof I speak built a mighty city on its bed, whereof naught but ruins and the name of Kor yet remaineth, and from age to age hewed the caves and passages that thou wilt see. It may be, I answered. But if so, how is it that the lake does not fill up again with the rains and the water of the springs? Nay, my son, the people were a wise people, and they left a drain to keep it clear. Sayest thou the river to the right? And he pointed to a fair-sized stream that wound away across the plain, some 4 miles from us. That is the drain, and it comes out through the mountain wall where this cutting goes in. At first, perhaps, the water ran down this canal, but afterwards the people turned it, and used the cutting for a road. And is there then no other place where one may enter into the great mountain, I asked, except through that drain? There is a place, he answered, where cattle and men on foot may cross with much labor, but it is secret. A year mightest thou search and shouldst never find it. It is only used once a year, when the herds of cattle that have been fatting on the slopes of the mountain, and on this plain, are driven into the space within. And does she live there always? I asked. Or does she come at times without the mountain? Nay, my son, where she is there she is. By now we were well on to the great plain, and I was examining with delight the varied beauty of its semi-tropical flowers and trees, the latter of which grew singly, or at most in clumps of 3 or 4, much of the timber being of large size, and belonging apparently to a variety of evergreen oak. There were also many palms, some of them more than 100 feet high, and the largest and most beautiful tree ferns that I ever saw, about which hung clouds of jeweled honeysuckers and great winged butterflies. Wandering about among the trees or crouching in the long and feathered grass were all varieties of game, from rhinoceroses down. I saw a rhinoceros, buffalo, a large herd, eland, quagga, and sable antelope, the most beautiful of all the bucks, not to mention many smaller varieties of game, and 3 ostriches which scudded away at our approach like white drift before a gale. So plentiful was the game that at last I could stand it no longer. I had a single-barrel sporting martini with me in the litter, the express being too cumbersome, and S being a beautiful fat eland rubbing himself under one of the oak-like trees. I jumped out of the litter, and proceeded to creep as near to him as I could. He let me come within 80 yards, and then turned his head, and stared at me, preparatory to running away. I lifted the rifle, and taking him about midway down the shoulder, for he was side on to me, fired. I never made a cleaner shot or a better kill in all my small experience, for the great buck sprang right up into the air and fell dead. The bearers, who had all halted to see the performance, gave a murmur of surprise, an unwanted compliment from these sullen people, who never appear to be surprised at anything, and a party of the guard at once ran off to cut the animal up. As for myself, though I was longing to have a look at him, I sauntered back to my litter, as though I had been in the habit of killing eland all my life, feeling that I had gone up several degrees in the estimation of the Haggard, who looked on the whole thing as a very high-class manifestation of witchcraft. As a matter of fact, however, I had never seen an eland in a wild state before. Bilali received me with enthusiasm. "It is wonderful, my son the baboon," he cried. "Wonderful. Thou art a very great man, though so ugly. Had I not seen, surely I would never have believed. And thou sayest that thou wilt teach me to slay in this fashion." "Certainly, my father," I said airily. "It is nothing." But all the same, I firmly made up my mind that when my father, Bilali, began to fire, I would without fail lie down or take refuge behind a tree. After this little incident nothing happened of any note till about an hour and a half before sundown, when we arrived beneath the shadow of the towering volcanic mass that I have already described. It is quite impossible for me to describe its grim grandeur, as it appeared to me, while my patient bearers toiled along the bed of the ancient watercourse towards the spot where the rich brown-hued cliff shot up from precipice to precipice, till its crown lost itself in a cloud. All I can say is that it almost awed me by the intensity of its lonesome and most solemn greatness. On we went up the bright and sunny slope, till at last the creeping shadows from above swallowed up its brightness, and presently we began to pass through a cutting hewn in the living rock. Deeper and deeper grew this marvelous work, which must, I should say, have employed thousands of men for many years. Indeed, how it was ever executed at all without the aid of blasting powder or dynamite I cannot to this day imagine. It is and must remain one of the mysteries of that wild land. I can only suppose that these cuttings and the vast caves that had been hollowed out of the rocks they pierced were the state undertakings of the people of Kor, who lived here in the dim lost ages of the world, and as in the case of the Egyptian monuments, were executed by the forced labor of tens of thousands of captives, carried on through an indefinite number of centuries. But who were the people? At last we reached the face of the precipice itself, and found ourselves looking into the mouth of a dark tunnel that forcibly reminded me of those undertaken by our 19th century engineers in the construction of railway lines. Out of this tunnel flowed a considerable stream of water. Indeed, though I do not think that I have mentioned it, we had followed this stream, which ultimately developed into the river I have already described as winding away to the right, from the spot where the cutting in the solid rock commenced. Half of this cutting formed a channel for the stream, and half, which was placed on a slightly higher level, 8 feet perhaps, was devoted to the purposes of a roadway. At the termination of the cutting, however, the stream turned off across the plain and followed a channel of its own. At the mouth of the cave the cavalcade was halted, and while the men employed themselves in lighting some earthenware lamps they had brought with them, Bilali, descending from his litter, informed me politely but firmly that the orders of she were that we were now to be blindfolded, so that we should not learn the secret of the paths through the bowels of the mountains. To this I, of course, assented cheerfully enough, but Job, who was now very much better, notwithstanding the journey, did not like it at all, fancying, I believe, that it was but a preliminary step to being hot-potted. He was, however, a little consoled when I pointed out to him that there were no hot pots at hand, and so far as I knew, no fire to heat them in. As for poor Leo, after turning restlessly for hours, he had, to my deep thankfulness, at last dropped off into a sleep or stupor, I do not know which, so there was no need to blindfold him. The blindfolding was performed by binding a piece of the yellowish linen, whereof those of the Haggard, who condescended to wear anything in particular made their dresses, tightly round the eyes. This linen I afterwards discovered was taken from the tombs, and was not, as I had at first supposed, of native manufacture. The bandage was then knotted at the back of the head, and finally brought down again, and the ends bound under the chin to prevent its slipping. Ustane was, by the way, also blindfolded, I do not know why, unless it was from fear that she should impart the secrets of the route to us. This operation performed, we started on once more, and soon, by the echoing sound of the footsteps of the bearers and the increased noise of the water caused by reverberation in a confined space, I knew that we were entering into the bowels of the great mountain. It was an eerie sensation, being borne along into the dead heart of the rock we knew not whither, but I was getting used to eerie sensations by this time, and by now was pretty well prepared for anything. So I lay still, and listened to the tramp of the bearers and the rushing of the water, and tried to believe that I was enjoying myself. Presently the men set up the melancholy little chant that I had heard on the first night when we were captured in the whaleboat, and the effect produced by their voices was very curious, and quite indescribable. After a while the air began to get exceedingly thick and heavy, so much so, indeed, that I felt as though I were going to choke, till at length the litter took a sharp turn, then another, and the sound of the running water ceased. After this the air was fresher again, but the turns were continuous, and to me, blindfolded as I was, most bewildering. I tried to keep a map of them in my mind in case it might ever be necessary for us to try and escape by this route, but needless to say, failed utterly. Another half-hour or so passed, and then suddenly I became aware that we were once more in the open air. I could see the light through my bandage and feel its freshness on my face. A few more minutes and the caravan halted, and I heard Bilali order Ustane to remove her bandage and undo ours. Without waiting for her attentions I got the knot of mine loose, and looked out. As I anticipated, we had passed right through the precipice, and were now on the farther side, and immediately beneath its beetling face. The first thing I noticed was that the cliff is not nearly so high here, not so high I should say by 500 feet, which proved that the bed of the lake, or rather of the vast ancient crater in which we stood, was much above the level of the surrounding plain. For the rest, we found ourselves in a huge rock-surrounded cup, not unlike that of the first place where we had sojourned, only 10 times the size. Indeed, I could only just make out the frowning line of the opposite cliffs. A great portion of the plain thus enclosed by nature was cultivated, and fenced in with walls of stone placed there to keep the cattle and goats, of which there were large herds about, from breaking into the gardens. Here and there rose great grass mounds, and some miles away towards the center, I thought that I could see the outline of colossal ruins. I had no time to observe anything more at the moment, for we were instantly surrounded by crowds of Haggard, similar in every particular to those with whom we were already familiar, who, though they spoke little, pressed round us so closely as to obscure the view to a person lying in a hammock. Then all of a sudden a number of armed men arranged in companies, and marshaled by officers who held ivory wands in their hands, came running swiftly towards us, having, so far as I could make out, emerged from the face of the precipice like ants from their burrows. These men as well as their officers were all robed in addition to the usual leopard skin, and as I gathered, formed the bodyguard of she herself. Their leader advanced to Bilali, saluted him by placing his ivory wand transversely across his forehead, and then asked some question which I could not catch, and Bilali having answered him, the whole regiment turned and marched along the side of the cliff, our cavalcade of litters following in their track. After going thus for about half a mile we halted once more in front of the mouth of a tremendous cave, measuring about 60 feet in height by 80 wide, and here Bilali descended finally, and requested Job and myself to do the same. Leo, of course, was far too ill to do anything of the sort. I did so, and we entered the great cave, into which the light of the setting sun penetrated for some distance, while beyond the reach of the daylight it was faintly illuminated with lamps which seemed to me to stretch away for an almost immeasurable distance, like the gas lights of an empty London street. The first thing I noticed was that the walls were covered with sculptures in bas-relief, of a sort, pictorially speaking, similar to those that I have described upon the vases. Love scenes principally, then hunting pictures, pictures of executions, and the torture of criminals by the placing of a, presumably, red-hot pot upon the head, showing whence our hosts had derived this pleasant practice. There were very few battle pieces, though many of duels and men running and wrestling, and from this fact I am led to believe that this people were not much subject to attack by exterior foes, either on account of the isolation of their position or because of their great strength. Between the pictures were columns of stone characters of a formation absolutely new to me. At any rate, they were neither Greek nor Egyptian, nor Hebrew nor Assyrian, that I am sure of. They looked more like Chinese writings than any other that I am acquainted with. Near to the entrance of the cave both pictures and writings were worn away, but further in they were in many cases absolutely fresh and perfect, as the day on which the sculptor had ceased work on them. The regiment of guards did not come further than the entrance to the cave, where they formed up to let us pass through. On entering the place itself we were, however, met by a man robed in white, who bowed humbly, but said nothing, which as it afterwards appeared that he was a deaf-mute, was not very wonderful. Running at right angles to the great cave, at a distance of some 20 feet from the entrance, was a smaller cave or wide gallery, that was pierced into the rock both to the right and to the left of the main cavern. In front of the gallery to our left stood 2 guards, from which circumstance I argued that it was the entrance to the apartments of she herself. The mouth of the right-hand gallery was unguarded, and along it the mute indicated that we were to go. Walking a few yards down this passage, which was lighted with lamps, we came to the entrance of a chamber having a curtain made of some grass material, not unlike a Zanzibar mat in appearance, hung over the doorway. This the mute drew back with another profound obeisance, and led the way into a good-sized apartment, hewn, of course, out of the solid rock, but to my great relief lighted by means of a shaft pierced in the face of the precipice. In this room was a stone bedstead, pots full of water for washing, and beautifully tanned leopard skins to serve as blankets. Here we left Leo, who was still sleeping heavily, and with him stopped Ustane. I noticed that the mute gave her a very sharp look, as much as to say, "Who are you, and by whose order do you come here?" Then he conducted us to another similar room which Job took, and then to 2 more that were respectively occupied by Bilali and myself. 12. The first care of Job and myself, after seeing to Leo, was to wash ourselves and put on clean clothing, for what we were wearing had not been changed since the loss of the dhow. Fortunately, as I think that I have said, by far the greater part of our personal baggage had been packed into the whaleboat, and was therefore saved, and brought hither by the bearers, although all the stores laid in by us for barter and presents to the natives were lost. Nearly all our clothing was made of a well-shrunk and very strong gray flannel, and excellent I found it for traveling in these places, because though a Norfolk jacket, shirt, and pair of trousers of it only weighed about 4 pounds, a great consideration in a tropical country, where every extra ounce tells on the wearer, it was warm, and offered a good resistance to the rays of the sun, and best of all to chills, which are so apt to result from sudden changes of temperature. Never shall I forget the comfort of the wash and brush up, and of those clean flannels. The only thing that was wanting to complete my joy was a cake of soap, of which we had none. Afterwards I discovered that the Haggard, who do not reckon dirt among their many disagreeable qualities, use a kind of burnt earth for washing purposes, which, though unpleasant to the touch till one gets accustomed to it, forms a very fair substitute for soap. By the time that I was dressed and had combed and trimmed my black beard, the previous condition of which was certainly sufficiently unkempt to give weight to Bilali's appellation for me of baboon, I began to feel most uncommonly hungry. Therefore I was by no means sorry when, without the slightest preparatory sound or warning, the curtain over the entrance to my cave was flung aside, and another mute, a young girl this time, announced to me by signs that I could not misunderstand, that is, by opening her mouth and pointing down it, that there was something ready to eat. Accordingly I followed her into the next chamber, which we had not yet entered, where I found Job, who had also, to his great embarrassment, been conducted thither by a fair mute. Job never got over the advances the former lady had made towards him, and suspected every girl who came near to him of similar designs. "These young parties have a way of looking at one, sir," he would say apologetically, "which I don't call respectable." This chamber was twice the size of the sleeping caves, and I saw at once that it had originally served as a refectory, and also probably as an embalming room for the priests of the dead. For I may as well say at once that these hollowed-out caves were nothing more nor less than vast catacombs, in which for tens of ages the mortal remains of the great extinct race whose monuments surrounded us had been first preserved, with an art and a completeness that has never since been equaled, and then hidden away for all time. On each side of this particular rock chamber was a long and solid stone table, about 3 feet wide by 3 feet 6 in height, hewn out of the living rock, of which it had formed part, and was still attached to at the base. These tables were slightly hollowed out or curved inward, to give room for the knees of any one sitting on the stone ledge that had been cut for a bench along the side of the cave at a distance of about 2 feet from them. Each of them, also, was so arranged that it ended right under a shaft pierced in the rock for the admission of light and air. On examining them carefully, however, I saw that there was a difference between them that had at first escaped my attention, viz., that one of the tables, that to the left as we entered the cave, had evidently been used, not to eat upon, but for the purposes of embalming. That this was beyond all question the case was clear from 5 shallow depressions in the stone of the table, all shaped like a human form, with a separate place for the head to lie in, and a little bridge to support the neck, each depression being of a different size, so as to fit bodies varying in stature from a full-grown man's to a small child's, and with little holes bored at intervals to carry off fluid. And indeed, if any further confirmation was required, we had but to look at the wall of the cave above to find it. For there, sculptured all round the apartment, and looking nearly as fresh as the day it was done, was the pictorial representation of the death, embalming, and burial of an old man with a long beard, probably an ancient king or grandee of this country. The first picture represented his death. He was lying upon a couch which had 4 short curved posts at the corners coming to a knob at the end, in appearance something like written notes of music, and was evidently in the very act of expiring. Gathered round the couch were women and children weeping, the former with their hair hanging down their backs. The next scene represented the embalmment of the body, which lay stark upon a table with depressions in it, similar to the one before us. Probably, indeed, it was a picture of the same table. 3 men were employed at the work, one superintending, one holding a funnel shaped exactly like a port wine strainer, of which the narrow end was fixed in an incision in the breast, no doubt in the great pectoral artery, while the third, who was depicted as standing straddle-legged over the corpse, held a kind of large jug high in his hand, and poured from it some steaming fluid which fell accurately into the funnel. The most curious part of this sculpture is that both the man with the funnel and the man who pours the fluid are drawn holding their noses, either I suppose because of the stench arising from the body, or more probably to keep out the aromatic fumes of the hot fluid which was being forced into the dead man's veins. Another curious thing which I am unable to explain is that all three men were represented as having a band of linen tied round the face with holes in it for the eyes. The third sculpture was a picture of the burial of the deceased. There he was, stiff and cold, clothed in a linen robe, and laid out on a stone slab such as I had slept upon at our first sojourning place. At his head and feet burnt lamps, and by his side were placed several of the beautiful painted vases that I have described, which were perhaps supposed to be full of provisions. The little chamber was crowded with mourners, and with musicians playing on an instrument resembling a lyre, while near the foot of the corpse stood a man holding a sheet, with which he was preparing to cover it from view. These sculptures, looked at merely as works of art, were so remarkable that I make no apology for describing them rather fully. They struck me also as being of surpassing interest as representing, probably with studious accuracy, the last rites of the dead as practiced among an utterly lost people. And even then I thought how envious some antiquarian friends of my own at Cambridge would be if ever I found an opportunity of describing these wonderful remains to them. Probably they would say that I was exaggerating, notwithstanding that every page of this history must bear so much internal evidence of its truth, that it would obviously have been quite impossible for me to have invented it. To return. As soon as I had hastily examined these sculptures, which I think I omitted to mention were executed in relief, we sat down to a very excellent meal of boiled goat's flesh, fresh milk, and cakes made of meal, the whole being served upon clean wooden platters. When we had eaten, we returned to see how Leo was getting on, Bilali saying that he must now wait upon she, and hear her commands. On reaching Leo's room we found the poor boy in a very bad way. He had woke up from his torpor, and was altogether off his head, babbling about some boat race on the Cam, and was inclined to be violent. Indeed, when we entered the room Ustane was holding him down. I spoke to him, and my voice seemed to soothe him. At any rate he grew much quieter, and was persuaded to swallow a dose of quinine. I had been sitting with him for an hour perhaps. At any rate I know that it was getting so dark that I could only just make out his head lying like a gleam of gold upon the pillow we had extemporized out of a bag covered with a blanket, when suddenly Bilali arrived with an air of great importance, and informed me that she herself had deigned to express a wish to see me, an honor, he added, accorded to but very few. I think that he was a little horrified at my cool way of taking the honor, but the fact was that I did not feel overwhelmed with gratitude at the prospect of seeing some savage, dusky queen, however absolute and mysterious she might be, more especially as my mind was full of dear Leo, for whose life I began to have great fears. However, I rose to follow him, and as I did so I caught sight of something bright lying on the floor, which I picked up. Perhaps the reader will remember that with the potsherd in the casket was a composition scarabaeus marked with a round O, a goose, and another curious hieroglyphic, the meaning of which is Sutton Sera, or Royal Son of the Sun. The scarab, which is a very small one, Leo had insisted upon having set in a massive gold ring, such as is generally used for signets, and it was this very ring that I now picked up. He had pulled it off in the paroxysm of his fever, at least I suppose so, and flung it down upon the rock floor. Thinking that if I left it about it might get lost, I slipped it on my own little finger, and then followed Bilali, leaving Job and Ustane with Leo. We passed down the passage, crossed the great aisle-like cave, and came to the corresponding passage on the other side, at the mouth of which the guards stood like two statues. As we came they bowed their heads in salutation, and then lifting their long spears placed them transversely across their foreheads, as the leaders of the troop that had met us had done with their ivory wands. We stepped between them, and found ourselves in an exactly similar gallery to that which led to our own apartments, only this passage was, comparatively speaking, brilliantly lighted. A few paces down it we were met by 4 mutes, 2 men and 2 women, who bowed low and then arranged themselves, the women in front and the men behind of us, and in this order we continued our procession past several doorways hung with curtains resembling those leading to our own quarters, and which I afterwards found opened out into chambers occupied by the mutes who attended on she. A few paces more and we came to another doorway facing us, and not to our left like the others, which seemed to mark the termination of the passage. Here 2 more white or rather yellow-robed guards were standing, and they too bowed, saluted, and let us pass through heavy curtains into a great antechamber, quite 40 feet long by as many wide, in which some 8 or 10 women, most of them young and handsome, with yellowish hair, sat on cushions working with ivory needles at what had the appearance of being embroidery frames. These women were also deaf and dumb. At the farther end of this great lamplit apartment was another doorway closed in with heavy oriental-looking curtains, quite unlike those that hung before the doors of our own rooms. And here stood 2 particularly handsome girl mutes, their heads bowed upon their bosoms and their hands crossed in an attitude of humble submission. As we advanced, they each stretched out an arm and drew back the curtains. Thereupon Bilali did a curious thing. Down he went, that venerable-looking old gentleman, for Bilali is a gentleman at the bottom, down onto his hands and knees, and in this undignified position, with his long white beard trailing on the ground, he began to creep into the apartment beyond. I followed him, standing on my feet in the usual fashion. Looking over his shoulder, he perceived it. "Down, my son, down, my baboon, down onto thy hands and knees. We enter the presence of she, and if thou art not humble, of a surety she will blast thee where thou standest." I halted and felt scared. Indeed, my knees began to give way of their own mere motion, but reflection came to my aid. I was an Englishman, and why, I asked myself, should I creep into the presence of some savage woman as though I were a monkey in fact as well as in name? I would not and could not do it, that is, unless I was absolutely sure that my life or comfort depended upon it. If once I began to creep upon my knees, I should always have to do so, and it would be a patent acknowledgement of inferiority. So fortified by an insular prejudice against kutooing, which has, like most of our so-called prejudices, a good deal of common sense to recommend it, I marched in boldly after Bilali. I found myself in another apartment, considerably smaller than the anteroom, of which the walls were entirely hung with rich-looking curtains of the same make as those over the door, the work, as I subsequently discovered, of the mutes who sat in the antechamber and wove them in strips, which were afterwards sewn together. Also, here and there about the room, were settees of a beautiful black wood of the ebony tribe, inlaid with ivory, and all over the floor were other tapestries, or rather rugs. At the top end of this apartment was what appeared to be a recess, also draped with curtains, through which shone rays of light. There was nobody in the place except ourselves. Painfully and slowly old Bilali crept up the length of the cave, and with the most dignified stride that I could command I followed after him. But I felt that it was more or less of a failure. To begin with, it is not possible to look dignified when you are following in the wake of an old man writhing along on his stomach like a snake, and then, in order to go sufficiently slowly, either I had to keep my legs some seconds in the air at every step, or else to advance with a full stop between each stride, like Mary Queen of Scots going to execution in a play. Bilali was not good at crawling. I suppose his years stood in the way, and our progress up that apartment was a very long affair. I was immediately behind him, and several times I was sorely tempted to help him on with a good kick. It is so absurd to advance into the presence of savage royalty after the fashion of an Irishman driving a pig to market, for that is what we looked like, and the idea nearly made me burst out laughing then and there. I had to work off my dangerous tendency to unseemly merriment by blowing my nose, a proceeding which filled old Bilali with horror, for he looked over his shoulder and made a ghastly face at me, and I heard him murmur, "Oh, my poor baboon." At last we reached the curtains, and here Bilali collapsed flat onto his stomach, with his hands stretched out before him as though he were dead, and I, not knowing what to do, began to stare about the place. But presently I clearly felt that somebody was looking at me from behind the curtains. I could not see the person, but I could distinctly feel his or her gaze, and what is more, it produced a very odd effect upon my nerves. I was frightened, I do not know why. The place was a strange one, it is true, and looked lonely, notwithstanding its rich hangings and the soft glow of the lamps. Indeed, these accessories added to, rather than detracted from its loneliness, just as a lighted street at night has always a more solitary appearance than a dark one. It was so silent in the place, and there lay Bilali like one dead before the heavy curtains, through which the odor of perfume seemed to float up towards the gloom of the arched roof above. Minute grew into minute, and still there was no sign of life, nor did the curtain move, but I felt the gaze of the unknown being sinking through and through me, and filling me with a nameless terror, till the perspiration stood in beads upon my brow. At length the curtain began to move. Who could be behind it? Some naked savage queen, a languishing oriental beauty, or a 19th century young lady, drinking afternoon tea? I had not the slightest idea, and should not have been astonished at seeing any of the three. I was getting beyond astonishment. The curtain agitated itself a little. Then suddenly between its folds there appeared a most beautiful white hand, white as snow, and with long tapering fingers ending in the pinkest nails. The hand grasped the curtain, and drew it aside, and as it did so I heard a voice, I think the softest and yet most silvery voice I ever heard. It reminded me of the murmur of a brook. "Stranger," said the voice in Arabic, but much purer and more classical Arabic than the Haggard talk. "Stranger, wherefore art thou so much afraid?" Now I flattered myself that in spite of my inward terrors I had kept a very fair command of my countenance, and was therefore a little astonished at this question. Before I had made up my mind how to answer it, however, the curtain was drawn, and a tall figure stood before us. I say a figure, for not only the body, but also the face was wrapped up in soft white, gauzy material in such a way as at first sight to remind me most forcibly of a corpse in its grave clothes. And yet I do not know why it should have given me that idea, seeing that the wrappings were so thin that one could distinctly see the gleam of the pink flesh beneath them. I suppose it was owing to the way in which they were arranged, either accidentally, or more probably by design. Anyhow, I felt more frightened than ever at this ghost-like apparition, and my hair began to rise upon my head as the feeling crept over me that I was in the presence of something that was not canny. I could, however, clearly distinguish that the swathed mummy-like form before me was that of a tall and lovely woman, instinct with beauty in every part, and also with a certain snake-like grace which I had never seen anything to equal before. When she moved a hand or foot her entire frame seemed to undulate, and the neck did not bend, it curved. "Why art thou so frightened, stranger?" asked the sweet voice again, a voice which seemed to draw the heart out of me, like the strains of softest music. "Is there that about me that should affright a man? Then surely are men changed from what they used to be." And with a little coquettish movement she turned herself, and held up one arm, so as to show all her loveliness and the rich hair of raven blackness that streamed in soft ripples down her snowy robes, almost to her sandalled feet. "It is thy beauty that makes me fear, O Queen," I answered humbly, scarcely knowing what to say, and I thought that as I did so I heard old Bilali, who was still lying prostrate on the floor, mutter, "Good, my baboon, good. I see that men still know how to beguile us women with false words." "Ah, stranger," she answered, with a laugh that sounded like distant silver bells, "thou wast afraid because mine eyes were searching out thine heart, therefore wast thou afraid. Yet being but a woman, I forgive thee for the lie, for it was courteously said. And now tell me, how came ye hither to this land of the dwellers among the caves? A land of swamps and evil things and dead old shadows of the dead? What came ye for to see? How is it that ye hold your lives so cheap as to place them in the hollow of the hand of Haya, into the hand of she who must be obeyed? Tell me also, how come ye to know the tongue I talk? It is an ancient tongue, that sweet child of the old Syriac. Liveth it yet in the world? Thou sayest I dwell among the caves and the dead, and not know I of the affairs of men, nor have I cared to know. I have lived, O stranger, with my memories, and my memories are in a grave that mine hands hollowed. For truly hath it been said that the child of man mocketh his own path evil. And her beautiful voice quivered, and broke in a note as soft as any wood bird's. Suddenly her eye fell upon the sprawling frame of Bilali, and she seemed to recollect herself. "Ah, thou art there, old man. Tell me how it is that things have gone wrong in thine household. Forsooth, it seems that these my guests were set upon. Ay, and one was nigh to being slain by the hot pot to be eaten of those brutes, thy children, and had not the others fought gallantly they too had been slain, and not even I could have called back the life which had been loosed from the body. What means it, old man? What hast thou to say that I should not give thee over to those who execute my vengeance?" Her voice had risen in her anger, and it rang clear and cold against the rocky walls. Also I thought I could see her eyes flash through the gauze that hid them. I saw poor Bilali, whom I had believed to be a very fearless person, positively quiver with terror at her words. "Oh Haya! Oh she!" he said, without lifting his white head from the floor. "Oh she, as thou art great, be merciful, for I am now as ever thy servant to obey. It was no plan or fault of mine, oh she, it was those wicked ones who are called my children. led on by a woman whom thy guest the pig had scorned, they would have followed the ancient custom of the land, and eaten the fat black stranger, who came hither with these thy guests the baboon and the lion who is sick, thinking that no word had come from thee about the black one. But when the baboon and the lion saw what they would do, they slew the woman, and slew also their servant to save him from the horror of the pot. Then those evil ones, aye, those children of the wicked one who lives in the pit, they went mad with the lust of blood, and flew at the throats of the lion and the baboon and the pig. But gallantly they fought. Ohia! They fought like very men, and slew many and held their own. And then I came and saved them. And the evildoers have I sent on hither to court to be judged of thy greatness, O she. And here they are. I, old man, I know it, and tomorrow will I sit in the great hall and do justice upon them, fear not. And for thee, I forgive thee though hardly. See that thou dost keep thine household better. Go. Bilali rose upon his knees with astonishing alacrity, bowed his head thrice, and his white beard sweeping the ground, crawled down the apartment as he had crawled up it, till he finally vanished through the curtains, leaving me, not a little to my alarm, alone with this terrible but most fascinating person. 13. Aisha unveils. There, said she. He has gone, the white-bearded old fool. Ah, how little knowledge does a man acquire in his life. He gathereth it up like water, but like water it runneth through his fingers, and yet if his hands be but wet as though with dew, behold a generation of fools call out. See, he is a wise man. Is it not so? But how call they thee? Baboon, he says, and she laughed. But that is the fashion of these savages who lack imagination, and fly to the beasts they resemble for a name. How do they call thee in thine own country, stranger? They call me Holly, O queen, I answered. Holly, she answered, speaking the word with difficulty, and yet with a most charming accent. And what is holly? Holly is a prickly tree, I said. So, well, thou hast a prickly and yet a tree-like look. Strong art thou, and ugly, but if my wisdom be not at fault, honest at the core, and a staff to lean on, also one who thinks. But stay, O Holly, stand not there, enter with me and be seated by me. I would not see thee crawl before me like those slaves. I am aweary of their worship and their terror. Sometimes when they vex me I could blast them for very sport, and to see the rest turn white, even to the heart. And she held the curtain aside with her ivory hand to let me pass in. I entered, shuddering. This woman was very terrible. Within the curtains was a recess about 12 feet by 10, and in the recess was a couch and a table whereon stood fruit and sparkling water. By it, at its end, was a vessel like a font cut in carved stone, also full of pure water. The place was softly lit with lamps formed out of the beautiful vessels of which I have spoken, and the air and curtains were laden with a subtle perfume. Perfume too seemed to emanate from the glorious hair and white clinging vestments of she herself. I entered the little room, and there stood uncertain. Sit, said she, pointing to the couch. As yet thou hast no cause to fear me. If thou hast cause, thou shalt not fear for long, for I shall slay thee. Therefore let thy heart be light. I sat down on the foot of the couch near to the font-like basin of water, and she sank down softly on to the other end. Now Holly, she said, how comest thou to speak Arabic? It is my own dear tongue, for Arabian am I by my birth, even al-Arab Alabama Ariba, an Arab of the Arabs, and of the race of our father Yarab, the son of Cotton, for in that fair and ancient city Ozil was I born, in the province of Yaman the Happy. Yet dost thou not speak it as we used to speak. Thy talk doth lack the music of the sweet tongue of the tribes of Hamyar which I was wont to hear. Some of the words too seem changed, even as among these Haggard, who have debased and defiled its purity, so that I must speak with them in what is to me another tongue. 1. Yarab the son of Cotton, who lived some centuries before the time of Abraham, was the father of the ancient Arabs, and gave its name Araba to the country. In speaking of herself as Al-Arab Alabama Ariba, she no doubt meant to convey that she was of the true Arab blood as distinguished from the naturalized Arabs, the descendants of Ismail, the son of Abraham and Hagar, who were known as Al-Arab Alabama Mastaraba. The dialect of the Quraysh was usually called the clear or perspicuous Arabic, but the Hammeritic dialect approached nearer to the purity of the Mother Syriac. I have studied it, I answered, for many years. Also the language is spoken in Egypt and elsewhere. So it is still spoken, and there is yet in Egypt? And what pharaoh sits upon the throne? Still one of the spawn of the Persian Achus, or are the Achaemenians gone, for far is it to the days of Achus? The Persians have been gone from Egypt for nigh 2,000 years, and since then the Ptolemies, the Romans, and many others have flourished and held sway upon the Nile, and fallen when their time was ripe, I said aghast. What canst thou know of the Persian Artaxerxes? She laughed and made no answer, and again a cold chill went through me. And Greece, she said. Is there still a Greece? Ah, I love the Greeks. Beautiful were they as the day, and clever, but fierce at heart and fickle, notwithstanding. Yes, I said, there is a Greece, and just now it is once more a people. Yet the Greeks of today are not what the Greeks of the old time were, and Greece herself is but a mockery of the Greece that was. So, the Hebrews, are they yet at Jerusalem? And does the temple that the wise king built stand? And if so, what God do they worship therein? Is their Messiah come, of whom they preached so much and prophesied so loudly, and doth he rule the earth? The Jews are broken and gone, and the fragments of their people strew the world, and Jerusalem is no more. As for the temple that Herod built. Herod, she said. I know not Herod. But go on. The Romans burnt it, and the Roman eagles flew across its ruins, and now Judea is a desert. So, they were a great people, those Romans, and went straight to their end. They sped to it like fate, or like their own eagles on their prey, and left peace behind them. Solitudinem facient, pacem appellant, I suggested. Ah, thou canst speak the Latin tongue too, she said in surprise. It hath a strange ring in my ears after all these days, and it seems to me that thy accent does not fall as the Romans put it. Who was it wrote that? I know not the saying, but it is a true one of that great people. It seems that I have found a learned man, one whose hands have held the water of the world's knowledge. Knowest thou Greek also? Yes, O Queen, and something of Hebrew, but not to speak them well. They are all dead languages now. She clapped her hands in childish glee. Of a truth, ugly tree that thou art, thou growest the fruits of wisdom, O Holly, she said. But of those Jews whom I hated, for they called me heathen when I would have taught them my philosophy, did their Messiah come, and doth he rule the world? Their Messiah came, I answered with reverence. But he came poor and lowly, and they would have none of him. They scourged him, and crucified him upon a tree, but yet his words and his works live on, for he was the Son of God. And now of a truth he doth rule half the world, but not with an empire of the world. Ah, the fierce-hearted wolves, she said. The followers of sense and many gods, greedy of gain and faction-torn. I can see their dark faces yet. So they crucified their Messiah? Well, can I believe it? That he was a son of the living Spirit would be naught to them, if indeed he was so. And of that we will talk afterwards. They would care not for any god if he came not with pomp and power. They a chosen people, a vessel of him they called Jehovah, and a vessel of Baal, and a vessel of Ashtoreth, and a vessel of the gods of the Egyptians, a high-stomached people, greedy of aught that brought them wealth and power. So they crucified their Messiah because he came in lowly guise. And now are they scattered about the earth? Why, if I remember, so said one of their prophets that it should be. Well, let them go. They broke my heart, those Jews, and made me look with evil eyes across the world. And drove me to this wilderness, this place of a people that was before them. When I would have taught them wisdom in Jerusalem they stoned me. At the gate of the temple those white-bearded hypocrites and rabbis hounded the people on to stone me. See, here is the mark of it to this day. And with a sudden move she pulled up the gauzy wrapping on her rounded arm, and pointed to a little scar that showed red against its milky beauty. I shrank back horrified. Pardon me, O Queen, I said, but I am bewildered. Nigh upon 2,000 years have rolled across the earth since the Jewish Messiah hung upon his cross at Golgotha. How then canst thou have taught thy philosophy to the Jews before he was? Thou art a woman and no spirit. How can a woman live 2,000 years? Why dost thou befool me, O Queen? She leaned back upon the couch, and once more I felt the hidden eyes playing upon me and searching out my heart. O man, she said at last, speaking very slowly and deliberately, it seems that there are still things upon the earth of which thou knowest not. Dost thou still believe that all things die, even as those very Jews believed? I tell thee that naught dies. There is no such thing as death, though there be a thing called change. See. And she pointed to some sculptures on the rocky wall. 3 times 2,000 years have passed since the last of the great race that hewed those pictures fell before the breath of the pestilence which destroyed them. Yet are they not dead. E'en now they live. Perchance their spirits are drawn towards us at this very hour. And she glanced round. Of a surety it sometimes seems to me that my eyes can see them. Yes, but to the world they are dead. Aye, for a time, but even to the world are they born again and again. Aye, yes, I shall too. For that, stranger, is my name. I say to thee that I wait now for one I love to be born again. And here I tarry till he finds me, knowing of a surety that hither he will come, and that here, and here only, shall he greet me. Why, dost thou believe that I who am all-powerful, I, whose loveliness is more than the loveliness of the Grecian Helen, of whom they used to sing, and whose wisdom is wider, I, far more wide and deep than the wisdom of Solomon the wise, I, who know the secrets of the earth and its riches, and can turn all things to my uses, I, who have even for a while overcome change, that ye call death, why I say, O stranger, dost thou think that I herd here with barbarians lower than the beasts? Too pronounced Ashadat LH. I know not, I said humbly, because I wait for him I love. My life has perchance been evil, I know not, for who can say what is evil and what good? So I fear to die even if I could die, which I cannot until mine hour comes, to go and seek him where he is. For between us there might rise a wall I could not climb, at least, I dread it. Surely easy would it be also to lose the way in seeking in those great spaces wherein the planets wander on forever. But the day will come, it may be when 5,000 more years have passed, and are lost and melted into the vault of time, even as the little clouds melt into the gloom of night. Or it may be tomorrow, when he, my love, shall be born again, and then, following a law that is stronger than any human plan, he shall find me here, where once he knew me, and of a surety his heart will soften towards me, though I sinned against him. Aye, even though he knew me not again, yet will he love me if only for my beauty's sake. For a moment I was dumbfounded, and could not answer. The matter was too overpowering for my intellect to grasp. But even so, O Queen, I said at last, even if we men be born again and again, that is not so with thee, if thou speakest truly. Here she looked up sharply, and once more I caught the flash of those hidden eyes. Thou, I went on hurriedly, who hast never died. That is so, she said. And it is so because I have, half by chance and half by learning, solved one of the great secrets of the world. Tell me, stranger, life is, why therefore should not life be lengthened for a while? What are 10 or 20 or 50,000 years in the history of life? Why in 10,000 years scarce will the rain and storms lessen a mountain top by a span in thickness? In 2,000 years these caves have not changed, nothing has changed but the beasts, and man, who is as the beasts. There is naught that is wonderful about the matter, couldst thou but understand. Life is wonderful, aye, but that it should be a little lengthened is not wonderful. Nature hath her animating spirit as well as man, who is nature's child, and he who can find that spirit, and let it breathe upon him, shall live with her life. He shall not live eternally, for nature is not eternal, and she herself must die, even as the nature of the moon hath died. She herself must die, I say, or rather change and sleep till it be time for her to live again. But when shall she die? Not yet, I ween, and while she lives, so shall he who hath all her secret live with her. All I have it not, yet have I some, more perchance than any who were before me. Now to thee I doubt not that this thing is a great mystery, therefore I will not overcome thee with it now. Another time I will tell thee more if the mood be on me, though perchance I shall never speak thereof again. Dost thou wonder how I knew that ye were coming to this land, and so saved your heads from the hot pot? I, O Queen, I answered feebly. Then gaze upon that water. And she pointed to the font-like vessel, and then bending forward, held her hand over it. I rose and gazed, and instantly the water darkened. Then it cleared, and I saw as distinctly as I ever saw anything in my life. I saw, I say, our boat upon that horrible canal. There was Leo lying at the bottom asleep in it, with a coat thrown over him to keep off the mosquitoes, in such a fashion as to hide his face, and myself, Job, and Mahome towing on the bank. I started back, aghast, and cried out that it was magic, for I recognized the whole scene. It was one which had actually occurred. Nay, nay, O Holly, she answered. It is no magic, that is a fiction of ignorance. There is no such thing as magic, though there is such a thing as a knowledge of the secrets of nature. That water is my glass. In it I see what passes if I will to summon up the pictures, which is not often. Therein I can show thee what thou wilt of the past, if it be anything that hath to do with this country and with what I have known, or anything that thou, the gazer, hast known. Think of a face if thou wilt, and it shall be reflected from thy mind upon the water. I know not all the secret yet, I can read nothing in the future, but it is an old secret, I did not find it. In Arabia and in Egypt the sorcerers knew it centuries gone. So one day I chanced to bethink me of that old canal, some 20 ages since I sailed upon it, and I was minded to look thereon again. So I looked, and there I saw the boat and 3 men walking, and one, whose face I could not see, but a youth of noble form, sleeping in the boat, and so I sent and saved ye. And now farewell. But stay, tell me of this youth, the lion, as the old man calls him. I would look upon him, but he is sick, thou sayest, sick with the fever, and also wounded in the fray. He is very sick, I answered sadly. Canst thou do nothing for him, O Queen, who knowest so much? Of a surety I can. I can cure him, but why speakest thou so sadly? Dost thou love the youth? Is he perchance thy son? He is my adopted son, O Queen. Shall he be brought in before thee? Nay. How long hath the fever taken him? This is the 3rd day. Good, then let him lie another day. Then will he perchance throw it off by his own strength, and that is better than that I should cure him, for my medicine is of a sort to shake the life in its very citadel. If, however, by tomorrow night, at that hour when the fever first took him, he doth not begin to mend, then will I come to him and cure him. Stay, who nurses him? Our white servant, him whom Bilali names the pig, also, and here I spoke with some little hesitation, a woman named Ustane, a very handsome woman of this country, who came and embraced him when she first saw him, and hath stayed by him ever since, as I understand is the fashion of thy people, O Queen. My people? Speak not to me of my people, she answered hastily. These slaves are no people of mine, they are but dogs to do my bidding till the day of my deliverance comes. And as for their customs, naught have I to do with them. Also call me not Queen. I am weary of flattery and titles. Call me Aisha, the name hath a sweet sound in mine ears. It is an echo from the past. As for this Ustane I know not. I wonder if it be she against whom I was warned, and whom I in turn did warn. Hath she, stay, I will see. And bending forward, she passed her hand over the font of water and gazed intently into it. See, she said quietly. Is that the woman? I looked into the water, and there, mirrored upon its placid surface, was the silhouette of Ustane's stately face. She was bending forward, with a look of infinite tenderness upon her features, watching something beneath her, and with her chestnut locks falling on to her right shoulder. It is she, I said in a low voice, for once more I felt much disturbed at this most uncommon sight. She watches Leo asleep. Leo, said Aisha in an absent voice. Why, that is lion in the Latin tongue. The old man hath named happily for once. It is very strange, she went on, speaking to herself. Very. So like, but it is not possible. With an impatient gesture, she passed her hand over the water once more. It darkened, and the image vanished silently and mysteriously as it had risen, and once more the lamplight, and the lamplight only, shone on the placid surface of that limpid, living mirror. Hast thou aught to ask me before thou goest, O Holly? She said, after a few moments' reflection. It is but a rude life that thou must live here, for these people are savages, and know not the ways of cultivated man. Not that I am troubled thereby, for behold my food. And she pointed to the fruit upon the little table. Naught but fruit doth ever pass my lips, fruit and cakes of flour, and a little water. I have bidden my girls to wait upon thee. They are mutes, thou knowest, deaf are they and dumb, and therefore the safest of servants, save to those who can read their faces and their signs. I bred them so. It hath taken many centuries and much trouble, but at last I have triumphed. Once I succeeded before, but the race was too ugly, so I let it die away, but now as thou sayest, they are otherwise. Once too I reared a race of giants, but after a while nature would no more of it, and it died away. Hast thou aught to ask of me? I one thing, O Aisha, I said boldly, but feeling by no means as bold as I trust one looked. I would gaze upon thy face. She laughed out in her bell-like notes. Bethink thee, Holly, she answered, bethink thee. It seems that thou knowest the old myths of the gods of Greece. Was there not one Actaeon who perished miserably, because he looked on too much beauty? If I show thee my face, perchance thou wouldst perish miserably also, perchance thou wouldst eat out thy heart in impotent desire. For no, I am not for thee. I am for no man, save one, who hath been but is not yet. As thou wilt, Aisha, I said. I fear not thy beauty. I have put my heart away from such vanity as woman's loveliness, that passeth like a flower. Nay, thou errest, she said. That does not pass. My beauty endures even as I endure. Still, if thou wilt, O rash man, have thy will. But blame not me if passion mount thy reason, as the Egyptian breakers used to mount a colt, and guide it whither thou wilt not. Never may the man to whom my beauty has been unveiled put it from his mind, and therefore even with these savages do I go veiled, lest they vex me, and I should slay them. Say, wilt thou see? I will, I answered, my curiosity overpowering me. She lifted her white and rounded arms. Never had I seen such arms before, and slowly, very slowly, withdrew some fastening beneath her hair. Then all of a sudden the long, corpse-like wrappings fell from her to the ground, and my eyes traveled up her form, now only robed in a garb of clinging white that did but serve to show its perfect and imperial shape, instinct with a life that was more than life, and with a certain serpent-like grace that was more than human. On her little feet were sandals, fastened with studs of gold. Then came ankles more perfect than ever sculptor dreamed of. About the waist her white kirtle was fastened by a double-headed snake of solid gold, above which her gracious form swelled up in lines as pure as they were lovely, till the kirtle ended on the snowy argent of her breast, whereon her arms were folded. I gazed above them at her face, and, I do not exaggerate, shrank back blinded and amazed. I have heard of the beauty of celestial beings. Now I saw it. Only this beauty, with all its awful loveliness and purity, was evil. At least, at the time, it struck me as evil. How am I to describe it? I cannot. Simply I cannot. The man does not live whose pen could convey a sense of what I saw. I might talk of the great changing eyes of deepest, softest black, of the tinted face, of the broad and noble brow, on which the hair grew low, and delicate, straight features. But beautiful, surpassingly beautiful as they all were, her loveliness did not lie in them. It lay rather, if it can be said to have had any fixed abiding place, in a visible majesty, in an imperial grace, in a godlike stamp of softened power, which shone upon that radiant countenance like a living halo. Never before had I guessed what beauty made sublime could be. And yet the sublimity was a dark one. The glory was not all of heaven, though none the less was it glorious. Though the face before me was that of a young woman of certainly not more than 30 years, in perfect health, and the first flush of ripened beauty, yet it had stamped upon it a look of unutterable experience, and of deep acquaintance with grief and passion. Not even the lovely smile that crept about the dimples of her mouth could hide the shadow of sin and sorrow. It shone even in the light of the glorious eyes. It was present in the air of majesty, and it seemed to say, "Behold me, lovely as no woman was or is, undying and half divine. Memory haunts me from age to age, and passion leads me by the hand. Evil have I done, and from age to age evil I shall do, and sorrow shall I know till my redemption comes." Drawn by some magnetic force which I could not resist, I let my eyes rest upon her shining orbs, and felt a current pass from them to me that bewildered and half blinded me. She laughed, ah how musically, and nodded her little head at me with an air of sublimated coquetry that would have done credit to a Venus Victrix. "Rash man," she said, "like Actaeon, thou hast had thy will. Be careful lest, like Actaeon, thou too dost perish miserably, torn to pieces by the bandhounds of thine own passions. I too, O Holly, am a virgin goddess, not to be moved of any man, save one, and it is not thou. Say, hast thou seen enough? I have looked on beauty, and I am blinded," I said hoarsely, lifting my hand to cover up my eyes. "So, what did I tell thee? Beauty is like the lightning. It is lovely, but it destroys, especially trees, O Holly. and again she nodded and laughed. Suddenly she paused, and through my fingers I saw an awful change come over her countenance. Her great eyes suddenly fixed themselves into an expression in which horror seemed to struggle with some tremendous hope arising through the depths of her dark soul. The lovely face grew rigid, and the gracious willowy form seemed to erect itself. "Man," she half whispered, half hissed, throwing back her head like a snake about to strike. "Man, whence hadst thou that scarab on thy hand? Speak, or by the spirit of life I will blast thee where thou standest." And she took one light step towards me, and from her eyes there shone such an awful light, to me it seemed almost like a flame, that I fell, then and there, on the ground before her, babbling confusedly in my terror. "Peace," she said, with a sudden change of manner, and speaking in her former soft voice. "I did affright thee. Forgive me. But at times, O Holly, the almost infinite mind grows impatient of the slowness of the very finite. And am I tempted to use my power out of vexation? Very nearly wast thou dead, but I remembered. But the scarab, about the scarabaeus. I picked it up," I gurgled feebly, as I got onto my feet again. And it is a solemn fact that my mind was so disturbed that at the moment I could remember nothing else about the ring except that I had picked it up in Leo's cave. "It is very strange," she said with a sudden access of woman-like trembling and agitation which seemed out of place in this awful woman. "But once I knew a scarab like to that. It hung round the neck of one I loved," and she gave a little sob, "and I saw that after all she was only a woman, although she might be a very old one. There," she went on, "it must be one like to it, and yet never did I see one like to it, for there too hung a history, and he who wore it prized it much. 3. But the scarab that I knew was not set thus in the bezel of a ring. Go now, Holly, go, and if thou canst, try to forget that thou hast of thy folly looked upon Aisha's beauty." And turning from me, she flung herself on her couch, and buried her face in the cushions. 3. I am informed by a renowned and learned Egyptologist, to whom I have submitted this very interesting and beautifully finished scarab, stillness, that he has never seen one resembling it. Although it bears a title frequently given to Egyptian royalty, he is of opinion that it is not necessarily the cartouche of a pharaoh, on which either the throne or personal name of the monarch is generally inscribed. What the history of this particular scarab may have been we can now, unfortunately, never know, but I have little doubt but that it played some part in the tragic story of the Princess Amenartes and her lover Callicrates, the forsworn priest of Isis. Editor. As for me, I stumbled from her presence, and I do not remember how I reached my own cave. 14. A Soul in Hell. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night when I cast myself down upon my bed, and began to gather my scattered wits, and reflect upon what I had seen and heard. But the more I reflected the less I could make of it. Was I mad or drunk, or dreaming? Or was I merely the victim of a gigantic and most elaborate hoax? How was it possible that I, a rational man, not unacquainted with the leading scientific facts of our history, and hitherto an absolute and utter disbeliever in all the hocus-pocus which in Europe goes by the name of the supernatural, could believe that I had within the last few minutes been engaged in conversation with a woman 2,000 and odd years old? The thing was contrary to the experience of human nature, and absolutely and utterly impossible. It must be a hoax, and yet if it were a hoax, what was I to make of it? What, too, was to be said of the figures on the water, of the woman's extraordinary acquaintance with the remote past, and her ignorance, or apparent ignorance, of any subsequent history? What, too, of her wonderful and awful loveliness? This, at any rate, was a patent fact, and beyond the experience of the world. No merely mortal woman could shine with such a supernatural radiance. About that she had, at any rate, been in the right. It was not safe for any man to look upon such beauty. I was a hardened vessel in such matters, having, with the exception of one painful experience of my green and tender youth, put the softer sex. I sometimes think that this is a misnomer, almost entirely out of my thoughts. But now, to my intense horror, I knew that I could never put away the vision of those glorious eyes. And alas! The very diablerie of the woman, whilst it horrified and repelled, attracted in even a greater degree. A person with the experience of 2,000 years at her back, with the command of such tremendous powers, and the knowledge of a mystery that could hold off death, was certainly worth falling in love with, if ever woman was. But alas, it was not a question of whether or no she was worth it, for so far as I could judge, not being versed in such matters, I, a fellow of my college, noted for what my acquaintances are pleased to call my misogyny, and a respectable man now well on in middle life, had fallen absolutely and hopelessly in love with this white sorceress. Nonsense. It must be nonsense. She had warned me fairly, and I had refused to take the warning. Curses on the fatal curiosity that is ever prompting man to draw the veil from woman, and curses on the natural impulse that begets it. It is the cause of half, aye, and more than half, of our misfortunes. Why cannot man be content to live alone and be happy, and let the women live alone and be happy too? But perhaps they would not be happy, and I am not sure that we should either. Here is a nice state of affairs. I, at my age, to fall a victim to this modern Circe. But then she was not modern, at least she said not. She was almost as ancient as the original Circe. I tore my hair, and jumped up from my couch, feeling that if I did not do something I should go off my head. What did she mean about the scarabaeus too? It was Leo's scarabaeus, and had come out of the old coffer that Vinci had left in my rooms nearly 21 years before. Could it be, after all, that the whole story was true, and the writing on the sherd was not a forgery, or the invention of some crack-brained, long-forgotten individual? And if so, could it be that Leo was the man that she was waiting for, the dead man who was to be born again? Impossible. The whole thing was gibberish. Who ever heard of a man being born again? But if it were possible that a woman could exist for 2,000 years, this might be possible also. Anything might be possible. I myself might, for aught I knew, be a reincarnation of some other forgotten self, or perhaps the last of a long line of ancestral selves. Well, vive la guerre. Why not? Only, unfortunately, I had no recollection of these previous conditions. The idea was so absurd to me that I burst out laughing, and addressing the sculptured picture of a grim-looking warrior on the cave wall, called out to him aloud, "Who knows, old fellow? Perhaps I was your contemporary. By Jove! Perhaps I was you and you are I." And then I laughed again at my own folly, and the sound of my laughter rang dismally along the vaulted roof, as though the ghost of the warrior had echoed the ghost of a laugh. Next I bethought me that I had not been to see how Leo was, so, taking up one of the lamps which was burning at my bedside, I slipped off my shoes and crept down the passage to the entrance of his sleeping cave. The draught of the night air was lifting his curtain to and fro gently, as though spirit hands were drawing and redrawing it. I slid into the vault-like apartment and looked round. There was a light by which I could see that Leo was lying on the couch, tossing restlessly in his fever, but asleep. At his side, half lying on the floor, half leaning against the stone couch, was Ustane. She held his hand in one of hers, but she too was dozing, and the two made a pretty, or rather a pathetic, picture. Poor Leo. His cheek was burning red. There were dark shadows beneath his eyes, and his breath came heavily. He was very, very ill, and again the horrible fear seized me that he might die, and I be left alone in the world. And yet if he lived he would perhaps be my rival with Aisha. Even if he were not the man, what chance should I, middle-aged and hideous, have against his bright youth and beauty? Well, thank heaven, my sense of right was not dead. She had not killed that yet, and as I stood there, I prayed to heaven in my heart that my boy, my more than son, might live, aye, even if he proved to be the man. Then I went back as softly as I had come, but still I could not sleep. The sight and thought of dear Leo lying there so ill had but added fuel to the fire of my unrest. My wearied body and overstrained mind awakened all my imagination into preternatural activity. Ideas, visions, almost inspirations, floated before it with startling vividness. Most of them were grotesque enough, some were ghastly, some recalled thoughts and sensations that had for years been buried in the debris of my past life. But behind and above them all, hovered the shape of that awful woman, and through them gleamed the memory of her entrancing loveliness. Up and down the cave I strode, up and down. Suddenly I observed, what I had not noticed before, that there was a narrow aperture in the rocky wall. I took up the lamp and examined it. The aperture led to a passage. Now, I was still sufficiently sensible to remember that it is not pleasant, in such a situation as ours was, to have passages running into one's bedchamber from no one knows where. If there are passages, people can come up them, They can come up when one is asleep, partly to see where it went to, and partly from a restless desire to be doing something. I followed the passage. It led to a stone stair, which I descended. The stair ended in another passage, or rather tunnel, also hewn out of the bedrock, and running, so far as I could judge, exactly beneath the gallery that led to the entrance of our rooms, and across the great central cave. I went on down it. It was as silent as the grave, but still, drawn by some sensation or attraction that I cannot define. I followed on, my stocking feet falling without noise on the smooth and rocky floor. When I had traversed some 50 yards of space, I came to another passage running at right angles, and here an awful thing happened to me. The sharp draft caught my lamp and extinguished it, leaving me in utter darkness in the bowels of that mysterious place. I took a couple of strides forward so as to clear the bisecting tunnel, being terribly afraid lest I should turn up it in the dark if once I got confused as to the direction, and then paused to think. What was I to do? I had no match. It seemed awful to attempt that long journey back through the utter gloom, and yet I could not stand there all night, and if I did, probably it would not help me much, for in the bowels of the rock it would be as dark at midday as at midnight. I looked back over my shoulder, not a sight or a sound. I peered forward into the darkness. Surely far away, I saw something like the faint glow of fire. Perhaps it was a cave where I could get a light. At any rate, it was worth investigating. Slowly and painfully I crept along the tunnel, keeping my hand against its wall, and feeling at every step with my foot before I put it down, fearing lest I should fall into some pit. 30 paces. There was a light, a broad light that came and went, shining through curtains. 50 paces. It was close at hand. 60. Oh great heaven! I was at the curtains, and they did not hang close, so I could see clearly into the little cavern beyond them. It had all the appearance of being a tomb, and was lit up by a fire that burnt in its center with a whitish flame, and without smoke. Indeed there, to the left, was a stone shelf with a little ledge to it 3 inches or so high, and on the shelf lay what I took to be a corpse. At any rate, it looked like one, with something white thrown over it. To the right was a similar shelf, on which lay some broidered coverings. Over the fire bent the figure of a woman. She was sideways to me and facing the corpse, wrapped in a dark mantle that hid her like a nun's cloak. She seemed to be staring at the flickering flame. Suddenly, as I was trying to make up my mind what to do, with a convulsive movement that somehow gave an impression of despairing energy, the woman rose to her feet and cast the dark cloak from her. It was she herself. She was clothed, as I had seen her when she unveiled, in the kirtle of clinging white, cut low upon her bosom, and bound in at the waist with the barbaric double-headed snake, and as before her rippling black hair fell in heavy masses down her back. But her face was what caught my eye, and held me as in a vice, not this time by the force of its beauty, but by the power of fascinated terror. The beauty was still there, indeed, but the agony, the blind passion, and the awful vindictiveness displayed upon those quivering features, and in the tortured look of the upturned eyes, were such as surpassed my powers of description. For a moment she stood still, her hands raised high above her head, and as she did so the white robe slipped from her down to her golden girdle, bearing the blinding loveliness of her form. She stood there, her fingers clenched, and the awful look of malevolence gathered and deepened on her face. Suddenly I thought of what would happen if she discovered me, and the reflection made me turn sick and faint. But even if I had known that I must die if I stopped, I do not believe that I could have moved, for I was absolutely fascinated. But still I knew my danger. Supposing she should hear me, or see me through the curtain, supposing I even sneezed, or that her magic told her that she was being watched, swift indeed would be my doom. Down came the clenched hands to her sides, then up again above her head, and as I am a living and honorable man, the white flame of the fire leapt up after them, almost to the roof, throwing a fierce and ghastly glare upon she herself, upon the white figure beneath the covering, and every scroll and detail of the rockwork. Down came the ivory arms again, and as they did so she spoke, or rather hissed, in Arabic, in a note that curdled my blood, and for a second stopped my heart. Curse her, may she be everlastingly accursed. The arms fell and the flames sank. Up they went again, and the broad tongue of fire shot up after them, and then again they fell. Curse her memory, Accursed be the memory of the Egyptian. Up again, and again down. Curse her, the daughter of the Nile, because of her beauty. Curse her, because her magic hath prevailed against me. Curse her, because she held my beloved from me. And again the flame dwindled and shrank. She put her hands before her eyes, and abandoning the hissing tone, cried aloud. What is the use of cursing? She prevailed, and she is gone. Then she recommenced with an even more frightful energy. Curse her where she is. Let my curses reach her where she is and disturb her rest. Curse her through the starry spaces. Let her shadow be accursed. Let my power find her even there. Let her hear me even there. Let her hide herself in the blackness. Let her go down into the pit of despair, because I shall one day find her. Again the flame fell, and again she covered her eyes with her hands. It is of no use, she wailed. Who can reach those who sleep? Not even I can reach them. Then once more she began her unholy rites. Curse her when she shall be born again. Let her be born accursed. Let her be utterly accursed from the hour of her birth, until sleep finds her. Yea, then let her be accursed, for then shall I overtake her with my vengeance and utterly destroy her. And so on. The flame rose and fell, reflecting itself in her agonized eyes. The hissing sound of her terrible maledictions, and no words of mine can convey how terrible they were, ran round the walls and died away in little echoes, and the fierce light and deep gloom alternated themselves on the white and dreadful form stretched upon that bier of stone. But at length she seemed to wear herself out and cease. She sat herself down upon the rocky floor, shook the dense cloud of her beautiful hair over her face and breast, and began to sob terribly in the torture of a heartrending despair. 2,000 years, she moaned. 2,000 years have I wanted and endured. But though century doth still creep on to century, and time give place to time, the sting of memory hath not lessened, the light of hope doth not shine more bright. Oh, to have lived 2,000 years, with all my passion eating out my heart, and with my sin ever before me. Oh, that for me life cannot bring forgetfulness. Oh, for the weary years that have been and are yet to come, and evermore to come, endless and without end. My love, my love, my love, why did that stranger bring thee back to me after this sort? For 500 years I have not suffered thus. Oh, if I sinned against thee, have I not wiped away the sin? When wilt thou come back to me who have all, and yet without thee have not? What is there that I can do? What? And perchance that Egyptian doth abide with thee where thou art, and mock my memory. Oh, why could I not die with thee, I who slew thee? Alas, that I cannot die. Alas, alas. And she flung herself prone upon the ground, and sobbed and wept till I thought her heart must burst. Suddenly she ceased, raised herself to her feet, rearranged her robe, and tossing back her long locks impatiently, swept across to where the figure lay upon the stone. O Callicrates, she cried, and I trembled at the name. I must look upon thy face again, though it be agony. It is a generation since I looked upon thee whom I slew with mine own hand. And with trembling fingers she seized the corner of the sheet-like wrapping that covered the form upon the stone bier, and then paused. When she spoke again, it was in a kind of odd whisper, as though her idea were terrible even to herself. Shall I raise thee, she said, apparently addressing the corpse, so that thou standest there before me, as of old? I can do it. And she held out her hands over the sheeted dead, while her whole frame became rigid and terrible to see, and her eyes grew fixed and dull. I shrank in horror behind the curtain, my hair stood up upon my head, and whether it was my imagination or a fact I am unable to say, but I thought that the quiet form beneath the covering began to quiver, and the winding sheet to lift as though it lay on the breast of one who slept. Suddenly she withdrew her hands, and the motion of the corpse seemed to me to cease. To what purpose? She said gloomily. Of what good is it to recall the semblance of life when I cannot recall the spirit? Even if thou stoodest before me thou wouldst not know me, and couldst but do what I bid thee. The life in thee would be my life, and not thy life, Callicrates. For a moment she stood there brooding, and then cast herself down on her knees beside the form, and began to press her lips against the sheet, and weep. There was something so horrible about the sight of this awe-inspiring woman letting loose her passion on the dead, so much more horrible even than anything that had gone before, that I could no longer bear to look at it, and turning began to creep, shaking as I was in every limb, slowly along the pitch-dark passage, feeling in my trembling heart that I had seen a vision of a soul in hell. On I stumbled, I scarcely know how. Twice I fell, once I turned up the bisecting passage, but fortunately found out my mistake in time. For 20 minutes or more I crept along, till at last it occurred to me that I must have passed the little stair by which I had descended. So, utterly exhausted and nearly frightened to death, I sank down at length there on the stone flooring, and sank into oblivion. When I came to, I noticed a faint ray of light in the passage just behind me. I crept to it, and found it was the little stair down which the weak dawn was stealing. Passing up it, I gained my chamber in safety, and flinging myself on the couch, was soon lost in slumber, or rather stupor. 15. Aisha gives judgment. The next thing that I remember was opening my eyes and perceiving the form of Job, who had now practically recovered from his attack of fever. He was standing in the ray of light that pierced into the cave from the outer air, shaking out my clothes as a makeshift for brushing them, which he could not do because there was no brush, and then folding them up neatly and laying them on the foot of the stone couch. This done, he got my traveling dressing case out of the Gladstone bag, and opened it ready for my use. First he stood it on the foot of the couch also, then being afraid, I suppose, that I should kick it off, he placed it on a leopard skin on the floor, and stood back a step or two to observe the effect. It was not satisfactory, so he shut up the bag, turned it on end, and having rested it against the foot of the couch, placed the dressing case on it. Next he looked at the pots full of water, which constituted our washing apparatus. Ah! I heard him murmur, "No hot water in this beastly place. I suppose these poor creatures only use it to boil each other in." And he sighed deeply. "What is the matter, Job?" I said. "Beg pardon, sir," he said, touching his hair. "I thought you were asleep, sir, and I am sure you seem as though you want it. One might think from the look of you that you had been having a night of it." I only groaned by way of answer. I had, indeed, been having a night of it, such as I hope never to have again. "How is Mr. Leo, Job?" "Much the same, sir. If he don't soon mend, he'll end, sir. And that's all about it. Though I must say that there savage, Ustane, do her best for him, almost like a baptized Christian. She is always hanging round and looking after him, and if I ventures to interfere it's awful to see her. Her hair seems to stand on end, and she curses and swears away in her heathen talk. At least I fancy she must be cursing, from the look of her." "And what do you do then?" "I make her a polite bow, and I say, 'Young woman, your position is one that I don't quite understand and can't recognize. Let me tell you that I has a duty to perform to my master as is incapacitated by illness, and that I am going to perform it until I am incapacitated too.' But she don't take no heed, not she, only curses and swears away worse than ever. Last night she put her hand under that sort of nightshirt she wears and whips out a knife with a kind of a curl in the blade, so I whips out my revolver, and we walks round and round each other till at last she bursts out laughing. It isn't nice treatment for a Christian man to have to put up with from a savage, however handsome she may be, but it is what people must expect as is fools enough." Job laid great emphasis on the fools. "To come to such a place to look for things no man is meant to find. It's a judgment on us, sir. That's my view, and I, for one, is of opinion that the judgment isn't half done yet. And when it is done we shall be done too, and just stop in these beastly caves with the ghosts and the corpses for once and all. And now, sir, I must be seeing about Mr. Leo's broth, if that wild cat will let me. And perhaps you would like to get up, sir, because it's past 9 o'clock. Job's remarks were not of an exactly cheering order to a man who had passed such a night as I had. And what is more, they had the weight of truth. Taking one thing with another, it appeared to me to be an utter impossibility that we should escape from the place we were. Supposing that Leo recovered, and supposing that she would let us go, which was exceedingly doubtful, and that she did not blast us in some moment of vexation, and that we were not hot-potted by the Haggard, it would be quite impossible for us to find our way across the network of marshes which, stretching for scores and scores of miles, formed a stronger and more impassable fortification round the various Haggard households than any that could be built or designed by man. No, there was but one thing to do, face it out, And speaking for my own part, I was so intensely interested in the whole weird story that, so far as I was concerned, notwithstanding the shattered state of my nerves, I asked nothing better, even if my life paid forfeit to my curiosity. What man for whom physiology has charms could forbear to study such a character as that of this Aisha when the opportunity of doing so presented itself? The very terror of the pursuit added to its fascination. And besides, as I was forced to own to myself even now in the sober light of day, she herself had attractions that I could not forget. Not even the dreadful sight which I had witnessed during the night could drive that folly from my mind. And alas, that I should have to admit it, it has not been driven thence to this hour. After I had dressed myself, I passed into the eating, or rather embalming chamber, and had some food, which was as before brought to me by the girl mutes. When I had finished, I went and saw poor Leo, who was quite off his head, and did not even know me. I asked Ustane how she thought he was, but she only shook her head and began to cry a little. Evidently her hopes were small. And I then and there made up my mind that, if it were in any way possible, I would get she to come and see him. Surely she would cure him if she chose. At any rate she said she could. While I was in the room, Bilali entered, and also shook his head. He will die at night, he said. God forbid, my father, I answered, and turned away with a heavy heart. She who must be obeyed commands thy presence, my baboon, said the old man as soon as we got to the curtain. But, oh my dear son, be more careful. Yesterday I made sure in my heart that she would blast thee when thou didst not crawl upon thy stomach before her. She is sitting in the great hall even now to do justice upon those who would have smitten thee and the lion. Come on, my son, come swiftly. I turned, and followed him down the passage, and when we reached the great central cave saw that many Haggard, some robed, and some merely clad in the sweet simplicity of a leopard skin, were hurrying along it. We mingled with the throng, and walked up the enormous and indeed, almost interminable cave. All the way its walls were elaborately sculptured, and every 20 paces or so passages opened out of it at right angles, leading, Bilali told me, to tombs, hollowed in the rock by the people who were before. Nobody visited those tombs now, he said. And I must say that my heart rejoiced when I thought of the opportunities of antiquarian research which opened out before me. At last we came to the head of the cave, where there was a rock dais almost exactly similar to the one on which we had been so furiously attacked, a fact that proved to me that these dais must have been used as altars, probably for the celebration of religious ceremonies, and more especially of rites connected with the interment of the dead. On either side of this dais were passages leading, Bilali informed me, to other caves full of dead bodies. Indeed, he added, the whole mountain is full of dead, and nearly all of them are perfect. In front of the dais were gathered a great number of people of both sexes, who stood staring about in their peculiar gloomy fashion, which would have reduced Mark Tapley himself to misery in about 5 minutes. On the dais was a rude chair of black wood inlaid with ivory, having a seat made of grass fiber, and a footstool formed of a wooden slab attached to the framework of the chair. Suddenly there was a cry of Haya! Haya! She! And thereupon the entire crowd of spectators instantly precipitated itself upon the ground, and lay still as though it were individually and collectively stricken dead, leaving me standing there like some solitary survivor of a massacre. As it did so, a long string of guards began to defile from a passage to the left, and ranged themselves on either side of the dais. Then followed about a score of male mutes, then as many women mutes bearing lamps, and then a tall white figure, swathed from head to foot, in whom I recognized she herself. She mounted the dais and sat down upon the chair, and spoke to me in Greek, I suppose because she did not wish those present to understand what she said. Come hither, O Holly, she said, and sit thou at my feet, and see me do justice on those who would have slain thee. Forgive me if my Greek doth halt like a lame man. It is so long since I have heard the sound of it that my tongue is stiff, and will not bend rightly to the words. I bowed, and mounting the dais, sat down at her feet. How hast thou slept, my Holly? She asked. I slept not well, O Aisha, I answered with perfect truth, and with an inward fear that perhaps she knew how I had passed the heart of the night. So, she said with a little laugh, I too have not slept well. Last night I had dreams, and methinks that thou didst call them to me, O Holly. Of what didst thou dream, Aisha? I asked indifferently. I dreamed, she answered quickly, of one I hate and one I love." And then, as though to turn the conversation, she addressed the captain of her guard in Arabic. "Let the men be brought before me." The captain bowed low, for the guard and her attendants did not prostrate themselves, but had remained standing, and departed with his underlings down a passage to the right. Then came a silence. She leaned her swathed head upon her hand, and appeared to be lost in thought, while the multitude before her continued to grovel upon their stomachs, only screwing their heads round a little so as to get a view of us with one eye. It seemed that their queen so rarely appeared in public that they were willing to undergo this inconvenience, and even graver risks, to have the opportunity of looking on her, or rather on her garments, for no living man there except myself had ever seen her face. At last we caught sight of the waving of lights, and heard the tramp of men coming along the passage, and in filed the guard, and with them the survivors of our would-be murderers, to the number of 20 or more, on whose countenances a natural expression of sullenness struggled with the terror that evidently filled their savage hearts. They were ranged in front of the dais, and would have cast themselves down on the floor of the cave like the spectators, but she stopped them. "Nay," she said in her softest voice, "stand, I pray you stand. Perchance the time will soon be when ye shall grow weary of being stretched out." And she laughed melodiously. I saw a cringe of terror run along the rank of the doomed wretches, and wicked villains as they were, I felt sorry for them. Some minutes, perhaps 2 or 3, passed before anything fresh occurred, during which she appeared from the movement of her head, for of course we could not see her eyes, to be slowly and carefully examining each delinquent. At last she spoke, addressing herself to me in a quiet and deliberate tone. "Dost thou, O my guest, recognize these men?" "Aye, O Queen, nearly all of them," I said, and I saw them glower at me as I said it. "Then tell to me, and this great company, the tale whereof I have heard." Thus adjured, I, in as few words as I could, related the history of the cannibal feast, and of the attempted torture of our poor servant. The narrative was received in perfect silence, both by the accused and by the audience, and also by she herself. When I had done, Aisha called upon Bilali by name, and lifting his head from the ground, but without rising, the old man confirmed my story. No further evidence was taken. "Ye have heard," said she at length, in a cold, clear voice, very different from her usual tones. Indeed, it was one of the most remarkable things about this extraordinary creature that her voice had the power of suiting itself in a wonderful manner to the mood of the moment. "What have ye to say, ye rebellious children? Why vengeance should not be done upon you?" For some time there was no answer, but at last one of the men, a fine broad-chested fellow, well on in middle life, with deep graven features and an eye like a hawk's, spoke, and said that the orders that they had received were not to harm the white men. Nothing was said of their black servant. So, egged on thereto by a woman who was now dead, they proceeded to try to hot-pot him after the ancient and honorable custom of their country, with a view of eating him in due course. As for their sudden attack upon ourselves, it was made in an access of sudden fury, and they deeply regretted it. He ended by humbly praying that they might be banished into the swamps, to live and die as it might chance, but I saw it written on his face that he had but little hope of mercy. Then came a pause, and the most intense silence reigned over the whole scene, which, illuminated as it was by the flicker of the lamps striking out broad patterns of light and shadow upon the rocky walls, was as strange as any I ever saw, even in that unholy land. Upon the ground before the dais were stretched scores of the corpse-like forms of the spectators, till at last the long lines of them were lost in the gloomy background. Before this outstretched audience were the knots of evil-doers, trying to cover up their natural terrors with a brave appearance of unconcern. On the right and left stood the silent guards, robed in white and armed with great spears and daggers, and men and women mutes watching with hard curious eyes. Then, seated in her barbaric chair above them all, with myself at her feet, was the veiled white woman, whose loveliness and awesome power seemed to visibly shine about her like a halo, or rather like the glow from some unseen light. Never have I seen her veiled shape look more terrible than it did in that space, while she gathered herself up for vengeance. At last it came. "Dogs and serpents," she began in a low voice that gradually gathered power as she went on, till the place rang with it. "Eaters of human flesh, 2 things have ye done. First, ye have attacked these strangers, being white men, and would have slain their servant, and for that alone death is your reward. But that is not all. Ye have dared to disobey me. Did I not send my word unto you by Bilali my servant, and the father of your household? Did I not bid you to hospitably entertain these strangers, whom now ye have striven to slay, and whom, had not they been brave and strong beyond the strength of men, you would cruelly have murdered? Hath it not been taught to you from childhood that the law of she is an ever-fixed law, and that he who breaketh it by so much as one jot or tittle shall perish? And is not my lightest word a law? Have not your fathers taught you this, I say, whilst as yet ye were but children? Do ye not know that as well might ye bid these great caves to fall upon you, or the sun to cease its journeying, as to hope to turn me from my courses, or make my word light or heavy, according to your minds? Well do ye know it, ye wicked ones. But ye are all evil, evil to the core. The wickedness bubbles up in you like a fountain in the springtime. Were it not for me, generations since had ye ceased to be, for of your own evil way had ye destroyed each other. And now, because ye have done this thing, because ye have striven to put these men, my guests, to death, and yet more because ye have dared to disobey my word, this is the doom that I doom you to, that ye be taken to the cave of torture, 1. And given over to the tormentors, and that on the going down of tomorrow's sun those of you, who yet remain alive be slain, even as ye would have slain the servant of this my guest. 1. The cave of torture. I afterward saw this dreadful place, also a legacy from the prehistoric people who lived in Kor. The only objects in the cave itself were slabs of rock arranged in various positions to facilitate the operations of the torturers. Many of these slabs, which were of a porous stone, were stained quite dark with the blood of ancient victims that had soaked into them. Also in the center of the room was a place for a furnace, with a cavity wherein to heat the historic pot. But the most dreadful thing about the cave was that over each slab was a sculptured illustration of the appropriate torture being applied. These sculptures were so awful that I will not harrow the reader by attempting a description of them. She ceased, and a faint murmur of horror ran round the cave. As for the victims, as soon as they realized the full hideousness of their doom, their stoicism forsook them, and they flung themselves down upon the ground, and wept and implored for mercy in a way that was dreadful to behold. I, too, turned to Aisha, and begged her to spare them, or at least to mete out their fate in some less awful way. But she was hard as adamant about it. My Holly, she said, again speaking in Greek, which to tell the truth, although I have always been considered a better scholar of the language than most men, I found it rather difficult to follow, chiefly because of the change in the fall of the accent. Aisha, of course, talked with the accent of her contemporaries, whereas we have only tradition and the modern accent to guide us as to the exact pronunciation. My Holly, it cannot be. Were I to show mercy to those wolves, your lives would not be safe among this people for a day. Thou knowest them not. They are tigers to lap blood, and even now they hunger for your lives. How thinkest thou that I rule this people? I have but a regiment of guards to do my bidding, therefore it is not by force. It is by terror. My empire is of the imagination. Once in a generation mayhap I do as I have done but now, and slay a score by torture. Believe not that I would be cruel, or take vengeance on anything so low. What can it profit me to be avenged on such as these? Those who live long, my Holly, have no passions, save where they have interests. Though I may seem to slay in wrath, or because my mood is crossed, it is not so. Thou hast seen how in the heavens the little clouds blow this way and that without a cause. Yet behind them is the great wind sweeping on its path whither it listeth. So it is with me, O Holly. My moods and changes are the little clouds, and fitfully these seem to turn, but behind them ever blows the great wind of my purpose. Nay, the men must die, and die as I have said. Then, suddenly turning to the captain of the guard, as my word is, so be it. 16. The tombs of Kawar. After the prisoners had been removed, Aisha waved her hand, and the spectators turned round, and began to crawl off down the cave like a scattered flock of sheep. When they were a fair distance from the dais, however, they rose and walked away, leaving the queen and myself alone, with the exception of the mutes and the few remaining guards, most of whom had departed with the doomed men. Thinking this a good opportunity, I asked she to come and see Leo, telling her of his serious condition. But she would not, saying that he certainly would not die before the night, as people never died of that sort of fever except at nightfall or dawn. Also she said that it would be better to let the sickness spend its course as much as possible before she cured it. Accordingly, I was rising to leave, when she bade me follow her, as she would talk with me, and show me the wonders of the caves. I was too much involved in the web of her fatal fascinations to say her no, even if I had wished, which I did not. She rose from her chair, and making some signs to the mutes, descended from the dais. Thereon 4 of the girls took lamps, and ranged themselves 2 in front and 2 behind us, but the others went away, as also did the guards. Now, she said, wouldst thou see some of the wonders of this place, O Holly? Look upon this great cave. Sawest thou ever the like? Yet was it, and many more like it, hollowed by the hands of the dead race that once lived here in the city on the plain. A great and wonderful people must they have been, those men of Kor, but like the Egyptians, they thought more of the dead than of the living. How many men, thinkest thou, working for how many years, did it need to the hollowing out this cave and all the galleries thereof? Tens of thousands, I answered. So, O Holly, this people was an old people before the Egyptians were. A little can I read of their inscriptions, having found the key thereto. And see thou here, this was one of the last of the caves that they hollowed. And turning to the rock behind her, she motioned the mutes to hold up the lamps. Carven over the dais was the figure of an old man seated in a chair, with an ivory rod in his hand. It struck me at once that his features were exceedingly like those of the man who was represented as being embalmed in the chamber, where we took our meals. Beneath the chair, which, by the way, was shaped exactly like the one in which Aisha had sat to give judgment, was a short inscription in the extraordinary characters of which I have already spoken, but which I do not remember sufficient of to illustrate. It looked more like Chinese writing than any other that I am acquainted with. This inscription Aisha proceeded, with some difficulty and hesitation, to read aloud and translate. It ran as follows. In the year 4259 from the founding of the city of Imperial Kor was this cave, or burial place, completed by Tisno, king of Kor, the people thereof and their slaves having labored thereat for 3 generations, to be a tomb for their citizens of rank who shall come after. May the blessings of the heaven above the heaven rest upon their work, and make the sleep of Tisno, the mighty monarch, the likeness of whose features is graven above, a sound and happy sleep till the day of awakening. 1. And also the sleep of his servants, and of those of his race who, rising up after him, shall yet lay their heads as low. 1. This phrase is remarkable, as seeming to indicate a belief in a future state. Editor. Thou sayest, O Holly, she said. This people founded the city, of which the ruins yet cumber the plain yonder, for 1,000 years before this cave was finished. Yet, when first mine eyes beheld it 2,000 years ago, was it even as it is now? Judge therefore, how old must that city have been? And now follow thou me, and I will show thee after what fashion this great people fell when the time was come for it to fall. And she led the way down to the center of the cave, stopping at a spot where a round rock had been let into a kind of large manhole in the flooring, accurately filling it just as the iron plates fill the spaces in the London pavements down which the coals are thrown. Thou sayest, she said. Tell me what is it? Nay, I know not, I answered, whereon she crossed to the left-hand side of the cave, looking towards the entrance, and signed to the mutes to hold up the lamps. On the wall was something painted with a red pigment in similar characters to those hewn beneath the sculpture of Tisno, king of Kor. This inscription she proceeded to translate to me, the pigment still being fresh enough to show the form of the letters. It ran thus. I, Junis, a priest of the great temple of Kor, write this upon the rock of the burying place in the year 4803 from the founding of Kor. Kor is fallen. No more shall the mighty feast in her halls, no more shall she rule the world, and her navies go out to commerce with the world. Kor is fallen, and her mighty works and all the cities of Kor, and all the harbors that she built and the canals that she made, are for the wolf and the owl and the wild swan, and the barbarian who comes after. 25 moons ago did a cloud settle upon Kor, and the 100 cities of Kor, and out of the cloud came a pestilence that slew her people, old and young, one with another, and spared not. One with another they turned black and died, the young and the old, the rich and the poor, the man and the woman, the prince and the slave. The pestilence slew, and ceased not by day or by night. And those who escaped from the pestilence were slain of the famine. No longer could the bodies of the children of Kor be preserved according to the ancient rites, because of the number of the dead. Therefore were they hurled into the great pit beneath the cave, through the hole in the floor of the cave. Then at last a remnant of this the great people, the light of the whole world, went down to the coast and took ship and sailed northwards. And now am I, the priest Junis, who write this, the last man left alive of this great city of men, but whether there be any yet left in the other cities I know not. This do I write in misery of heart before I die, because Kor the imperial is no more, and because there are none to worship in her temple, and all her palaces are empty, and her princes and her captains and her traders and her fair women have passed off the face of the earth. I gave a sigh of astonishment. The utter desolation depicted in this rude scrawl was so overpowering. It was terrible to think of this solitary survivor of a mighty people recording its fate before he too went down into darkness. What must the old man have felt as, in ghastly terrifying solitude, by the light of one lamp feebly illuminating a little space of gloom, he in a few brief lines daubed the history of his nation's death upon the cavern wall. What a subject for the moralist or the painter, or indeed for any one who can think. Doth it not occur to thee, O Holly, said Aisha, laying her hand upon my shoulder, that those men who sailed north may have been the fathers of the first Egyptians? Nay, I know not, I said. It seems that the world is very old. Old. Yes, it is old indeed. Time after time have nations, aye, and rich and strong nations, learned in the arts, been and passed away and been forgotten, so that no memory of them remains. This is but one of several, for time eats up the works of man, unless indeed he digs in caves like the people of Kor, and then mayhap the sea swallows them, or the earthquake shakes them in. Who knows what hath been on the earth, or what shall be? There is no new thing under the sun, as the wise Hebrew wrote long ago. Yet were not these people utterly destroyed as I think. Some few remained in the other cities, for their cities were many, but the barbarians from the south, or perchance my people, the Arabs, came down upon them, and took their women to wife, and the race of the Haggard that is now is a bastard brood of the mighty sons of Kor, and behold it dwelleth in the tombs with its father's bones. 2. But I know not. Who can know? My arts cannot pierce so far into the blackness of time's night. A great people were they. They conquered till none were left to conquer, and then they dwelt at ease within their rocky mountain walls, with their manservants and their maidservants, their minstrels, their sculptors, and their concubines, and traded and quarreled, and ate and hunted and slept and made merry till their time came. But come, I will show thee the great pit beneath the cave whereof the writing speaks. Never shall thine eyes witness such another sight. 2. The name of the race Haggard would seem to indicate a curious mingling of races, such as might easily have occurred in the neighborhood of the Zambesi. The prefix Ama is common to the Zulu and kindred races and signifies people, while Haggard is an Arabic word meaning a stone. Editor. Accordingly I followed her to a side passage opening out of the main cave, then down a great number of steps, and along an underground shaft which cannot have been less than 60 feet beneath the surface of the rock, and was ventilated by curious borings that ran upward, I know not where. Suddenly the passage ended, and she halted and bade the mutes hold up the lamps, and as she had prophesied, I saw a scene such as I was not likely to see again. We were standing in an enormous pit, or rather on the brink of it, for it went down deeper, I do not know how much, than the level on which we stood, and was edged in with a low wall of rock. So far as I could judge, this pit was about the size of the space beneath the dome of St. Paul's in London, and when the lamps were held up I saw that it was nothing but one vast charnel house, being literally full of thousands of human skeletons, which lay piled up in an enormous gleaming pyramid, formed by the slipping down of the bodies at the apex as fresh ones were dropped in from above. Anything more appalling than this jumbled mass of the remains of a departed race I cannot imagine. And what made it even more dreadful was that in this dry air a considerable number of the bodies had simply become desiccated with the skin still on them, and now, fixed in every conceivable position, stared at us out of the mountain of white bones, grotesquely horrible caricatures of humanity. In my astonishment I uttered an ejaculation, and the echoes of my voice, ringing in the vaulted space, disturbed a skull that had been accurately balanced for many thousands of years near the apex of the pile. Down it came with a run, bounding along merrily towards us, and of course bringing an avalanche of other bones after it, till at last the whole pit rattled with their movement, even as though the skeletons were getting up to greet us. "Come," I said. "I have seen enough. These are the bodies of those who died of the great sickness. Is it not so?" I added as we turned away. "Yeah. The people of Kor ever embalmed their dead, as did the Egyptians, but their art was greater than the art of the Egyptians, for whereas the Egyptians disemboweled and drew the brain, the people of Kor injected fluid into the veins, and thus reached every part. But stay, thou shalt see." And she halted at haphazard at one of the little doorways opening out of the passage along which we were walking, and motioned to the mutes to light us in. We entered into a small chamber similar to the one in which I had slept at our first stopping place, only instead of one there were 2 stone benches or beds in it. On the benches lay figures covered with yellow linen, 3 on which a fine and impalpable dust had gathered in the course of ages, but nothing like to the extent that one would have anticipated, for in these deep-hewn caves there is no material to turn to dust. About the bodies on the stone shelves and floor of the tomb were many painted vases, but I saw very few ornaments or weapons in any of the vaults. 3. All the linen that the Haggard wore was taken from the tombs, which accounted for its yellow hue. It was well washed, however, and properly rebleached. It acquired its former snowy whiteness, and was the softest and best linen I ever saw. "Uplift the cloths, O Holly," said Aisha, but when I put out my hand to do so I drew it back again. It seemed like sacrilege, and to speak the truth, I was awed by the dread solemnity of the place, and of the presences before us. Then, with a little laugh at my fears, she drew them herself, only to discover other and yet finer cloths lying over the forms upon the stone bench. These also she withdrew, and then for the first time for thousands upon thousands of years did living eyes look upon the face of that chilly dead. It was a woman. She might have been 35 years of age, or perhaps a little less, and had certainly been beautiful. Even now her calm clear-cut features, marked out with delicate eyebrows and long eyelashes which threw little lines of the shadow of the lamplight upon the ivory face, were wonderfully beautiful. There, robed in white, down which her blue-black hair was streaming, she slept her last long sleep, and on her arm, its face pressed against her breast, there lay a little babe. So sweet was the sight, although so awful, that, I confess it without shame, I could scarcely withhold my tears. It took me back across the dim gulf of ages to some happy home in dead imperial Kor, where this winsome lady girt about with beauty had lived and died, and dying taken her last-born with her to the tomb. There they were before us, mother and babe, the white memories of a forgotten human history speaking more eloquently to the heart than could any written record of their lives. Reverently I replaced the gravecloths, and with a sigh that flowers so fair should, in the purpose of the everlasting, have only bloom to be gathered to the grave, I turned to the body on the opposite shelf, and gently unveiled it. It was that of a man in advanced life, with a long grizzled beard, and also robed in white, probably the husband of the lady, who after surviving her many years, came at the last to sleep once more for good and all beside her. We left the place and entered others. It would be too long to describe the many things I saw in them. Each one had its occupants, for the 500 and odd years that had elapsed between the completion of the cave and the destruction of the race had evidently sufficed to fill these catacombs, numberless as they were, and all appeared to have been undisturbed since the day when they were placed there. I could fill a book with the description of them, but to do so would only be to repeat what I have said with variations. Nearly all the bodies, so masterfully was the art with which they had been treated, were as perfect as on the day of death thousands of years before. Nothing came to injure them in the deep silence of the living rock. They were beyond the reach of heat and cold and damp, and the aromatic drugs with which they had been saturated were evidently practically everlasting in their effect. Here and there, however, we saw an exception, and in these cases, although the flesh looked sound enough externally, if one touched it fell in, and revealed the fact that the figure was but a pile of dust. This arose, Aisha told me, from these particular bodies having, either owing to haste in the burial or other causes, been soaked in the preservative, for instead of its being injected into the substance of the flesh. For, Aisha afterwards showed me the tree from the leaves of which this ancient preservative was manufactured. It is a low bush-like tree, that to this day grows in wonderful plenty upon the sides of the mountains, or rather upon the slopes leading up to the rocky walls. The leaves are long and narrow, a vivid green in color, but turning a bright red in the autumn, and not unlike those of a laurel in general appearance. They have little smell when green, but if boiled the aromatic odor from them is so strong that one can hardly bear it. The best mixture, however, was made from the roots, and among the people of Kor there was a law, which Aisha showed me alluded to on some of the inscriptions, to the effect that on pain of heavy penalties no one under a certain rank was to be embalmed with the drugs prepared from the roots. The object and effect of this was, of course, to preserve the trees from extermination. The sale of the leaves and roots was a government monopoly, and from it the kings of Kor derived a large proportion of their private revenue. About the last tomb we visited I must, however, say one word, for its contents spoke even more eloquently to the human sympathies than those of the first. It had but 2 occupants, and they lay together on a single shelf. I withdrew the grave cloths, and there, clasped heart to heart, were a young man and a blooming girl. Her head rested on his arm, and his lips were pressed against her brow. I opened the man's linen robe, and there over his heart was a dagger wound, and beneath the woman's fair breast was a light cruel stab, through which her life had ebbed away. On the rock above was an inscription in 3 words. Aisha translated it. It was wedded in death. What was the life story of these 2, who of a truth, were beautiful in their lives, and in their death were not divided? I closed my eyelids, and imagination, taking up the thread of thought, shot its swift shuttle back across the ages, weaving a picture on their blackness so real and vivid in its details that I could almost for a moment think that I had triumphed o'er the past, and that my spirit's eyes had pierced the mystery of time. I seemed to see this fair girl form, the yellow hair streaming down her, glittering against her garment's snowy white, and the bosom that was whiter than the robes, even dimming with its luster her ornaments of burnished gold. I seemed to see the great cave filled with warriors, bearded and clad in mail, and on the lighted dais where Aisha had given judgment, a man standing, robed, and surrounded by the symbols of his priestly office. And up the cave there came one clad in purple, and before him and behind him came minstrels and fair maidens, chanting a wedding song. White stood the maid against the altar, fairer than the fairest there, purer than a lily, and more cold than the dew that glistens in its heart. But as the man drew near she shuddered. Then out of the press and throng there sprang a dark-haired youth, and put his arms about this long-forgotten maid, and kissed her pale face in which the blood shot up like lights of the red dawn across the silent sky. And next there was turmoil and uproar, and a flashing of swords, and they tore the youth from her arms and stabbed him, but with a cry she snatched the dagger from his belt, and drove it into her snowy breast, home to the heart, and down she fell, and then with cries and wailing, and every sound of lamentation, the pageant rolled away from the arena of my vision, and once more the past shut to its book. Let him who reads forgive the intrusion of a dream into a history of fact. But it came so home to me. I saw it all so clear in a moment, as it were. And besides, who shall say what proportion of fact, past, present, or to come, may lie in the imagination? What is imagination? Perhaps it is the shadow of the intangible truth, perhaps it is the soul's thought. In an instant the whole thing had passed through my brain, and she was addressing me. Behold the lot of man, said the veiled Aisha, as she drew the winding sheets back over the dead lovers, speaking in a solemn, thrilling voice, which accorded well with the dream that I had dreamed. To the tomb, and to the forgetfulness that hides the tomb, must we all come at last. Even I who live so long. Even for me, O Holly, thousands upon thousands of years hence. Thousands of years after thou hast gone through the gate and been lost in the mists, a day will dawn whereon I shall die, and be even as thou art and these are. And then what will it avail that I have lived a little longer, holding off death by the knowledge that I have wrung from nature, since at last I too must die? What is a span of 10,000 years, or 10 times 10,000 years, in the history of time? It is as naught. It is as the mists that roll up in the sunlight. It fleeth away like an hour of sleep or a breath of the eternal spirit. Behold the lot of man. Certainly it shall overtake us, and we shall sleep. Certainly, too, we shall awake and live again, and again shall sleep, and so on, through periods, spaces, and times from aeon unto aeon, till the world is dead, and the worlds beyond the world are dead, and not liveth but the spirit that is life. But for us twain and for these dead ones shall the end of ends be life, or shall it be death? As yet death is but life's night, but out of the night is the morrow born again, and doth again beget the night. Only when day and night, and life and death, are ended and swallowed up in that from which they came, what shall be our fate, O Holly? Who can see so far? Not even I. And then, with a sudden change of tone and manner, hast thou seen enough, my stranger guest? Or shall I show thee more of the wonders of these tombs that are my palace halls? If thou wilt, I can lead thee to where Tisno, the mightiest and most valorous king of Kor, in whose day these caves were ended, lies in a pomp that seems to mock at nothingness, and bid the empty shadows of the past do homage to his sculptured vanity. I have seen enough, O Queen, I answered. My heart is overwhelmed by the power of the present death. Mortality is weak, and easily broken down by a sense of the companionship that waits upon its end. Take me hence, O Aisha. 17. The balance turns. In a few minutes, following the lamps of the mutes, which, held out from the body as a bearer holds water in a vessel, had the appearance of floating down the darkness by themselves, we came to a stair which led us to She's anteroom, the same that Bilali had crept up upon on all fours on the previous day. Here I would have bid the queen adieu, but she would not. Nay, she said, enter with me, O Holly, for of a truth thy conversation pleaseth me. Think, O Holly, for 2,000 years have I had none to converse with save slaves and my own thoughts, and though of all this thinking hath much wisdom come, and many secrets been made plain, yet am I weary of my thoughts, and have come to loathe mine own society. For surely the food that memory gives to eat is bitter to the taste, and it is only with the teeth of hope that we can bear to bite it. Now though thy thoughts are green and tender, as becometh one so young, yet are they those of a thinking brain, and in truth thou dost bring back to my mind certain of those old philosophers with whom in days bygone I have disputed at Athens, and at Becca in Arabia, for thou hast the same crabbed air and dusty look, as though thou hadst passed thy days in reading ill-writ Greek, and been stained dark with the grime of manuscripts. So draw the curtain, and sit here by my side, and we will eat fruit, and talk of pleasant things. See, I will again unveil to thee. Thou hast brought it on thyself, O Holly, fairly have I warned thee, and thou shalt call me beautiful as even those old philosophers were wont to do. Fie upon them, forgetting their philosophy. And without more ado she stood up and shook the white wrappings from her, and came forth shining and splendid like some glittering snake when she has cast her slough. And fixed her wonderful eyes upon me, more deadly than any basilisks, and pierced me through and through with their beauty, and sent her light laugh ringing through the air like chimes of silver bells. A new mood was on her, and the very color of her mind seemed to change beneath it. It was no longer torture-torn and hateful, as I had seen it when she was cursing her dead rival by the leaping flames, no longer icily terrible as in the judgment hall, no longer rich and somber, and splendid, like a Tyrian cloth, as in the dwellings of the dead. No, her mood now was that of Aphrodite triumphing. Life, radiant, ecstatic, wonderful, seemed to flow from her and around her. Softly she laughed and sighed, and swift her glances flew. She shook her heavy tresses, and their perfume filled the place. She struck her little sandalled foot upon the floor, and hummed a snatch of some old Greek epithalamium. All the majesty was gone, or did but lurk and faintly flicker through her laughing eyes, like lightning seen through sunlight. She had cast off the terror of the leaping flame, the cold power of judgment that was even now being done, and the wise sadness of the tombs, cast them off and put them behind her, like the white shroud she wore, and now stood out the incarnation of lovely tempting womanhood, made more perfect, and in a way more spiritual, than ever woman was before. So my Holly, sit there where thou canst see me. It is by thine own wish, remember, again I say, blame me not if thou dost wear away thy little span with such a sick pain at the heart that thou wouldst fain have died before ever thy curious eyes were set upon me. There, sit so, and tell me, for in truth I am inclined for praises. Tell me, am I not beautiful? Nay, speak not so hastily, consider well the point. Take me feature by feature, forgetting not my form, and my hands and feet, and my hair and the whiteness of my skin, and then tell me truly, hast thou ever known a woman who in aught, in one little portion of her beauty, in the curve of an eyelash even, or the modeling of a shell-like ear, is justified to hold a light before my loveliness? Now my waist. Perchance thou thinkest it too large, but of a truth it is not so. It is this golden snake that is too large, and doth not bind it as it should. It is a wide snake, and knoweth that it is ill to tie in the waist. But see, give me thy hands so, now press them round me, and there, with but a little force thy fingers touch, O Holly. I could bear it no longer. I am but a man, and she was more than a woman. Heaven knows what she was, I do not. But then and there I fell upon my knees before her, and told her in a sad mixture of languages, for such moments confused the thoughts, that I worshipped her as never woman was worshipped, and that I would give my immortal soul to marry her, which at that time I certainly would have done, and so, indeed, would any other man, or all the race of men rolled into one. For a moment she looked surprised, and then she began to laugh, and clap her hands in glee. Oh, so soon, O Holly, she said. I wondered how many minutes it would need to bring thee to thy knees. I have not seen a man kneel before me for so many days, and believe me, to a woman's heart the sight is sweet. Ay, wisdom and length of days take not from that dear pleasure which is our sex's only right. What wouldst thou? What wouldst thou? Thou dost not know what thou doest. Have I not told thee that I am not for thee? I love but one, and thou art not the man. A Holly, for all thy wisdom, and in a way thou art wise, thou art but a fool running after folly. Thou wouldst look into mine eyes, thou wouldst kiss me. Well, if it pleaseth thee, look. And she bent herself towards me, and fixed her dark and thrilling orbs upon my own. Ay, and kiss too, if thou wilt, for thanks be given to the scheme of things, kisses leave no marks, except upon the heart. But if thou dost kiss, I tell thee of a surety wilt thou eat out thy breast with love of me, and die. And she bent yet further towards me till her soft hair brushed my brow, and her fragrant breath played upon my face, and made me faint and weak. Then of a sudden, even as I stretched out my hands to clasp, she straightened herself, and a quick change passed over her. Reaching out her hand, she held it over my head, and it seemed to me that something flowed from it that chilled me back to common sense, and a knowledge of propriety and the domestic virtues. Enough of this wanton folly, she said with a touch of sternness. Listen, Holly. Thou art a good and honest man, and I fain would spare thee, but oh, it is so hard for woman to be merciful. I have said I am not for thee, therefore let thy thoughts pass by me like an idle wind, and the dust of thy imagination sink again into the depths. Well, of despair, if thou wilt. Thou dost not know me, Holly. Hadst thou seen me but 10 hours past when my passion seized me, thou hadst shrunk from me in fear and trembling. I am of many moods, and like the water in that vessel, I reflect many things, but they pass, my Holly, they pass, and are forgotten. Only the water is the water still, and I still am I, and that which mocketh the water mocketh it, and that which mocketh me, nor can my quality be altered. Therefore, pay no heed to what I seem, seeing that thou canst not know what I am. If thou troublest me again, I will veil myself, and thou shalt behold my face no more. I rose, and sank on the cushioned couch beside her, yet quivering with emotion, though for a moment my mad passion had left me, as the leaves of a tree quiver still, although the gust be gone that stirred them. I did not dare to tell her that I had seen her in that deep and hellish mood, muttering incantations to the fire in the tomb. So, she went on, now eat some fruit. Believe me, it is the only true food for man. Oh, tell me of the philosophy of that Hebrew Messiah, who came after me, and who thou sayest doth now rule Rome, and Greece and Egypt, and the barbarians beyond. It must have been a strange philosophy that he taught, for in my day the peoples would have naught of our philosophies. Revel and lust and drink, blood and cold steel, and the shock of men gathered in the battle, these were the canons of their creeds. I had recovered myself a little by now, and feeling bitterly ashamed of the weakness into which I had been betrayed, I did my best to expound to her the doctrines of Christianity, to which, however, with the single exception of our conception of heaven and hell, I found that she paid but scant attention, her interest being all directed towards the man who taught them. Also I told her that among her own people, the Arabs, another prophet, one Muhammad, had arisen and preached a new faith, to which many millions of mankind now adhered. Ah, she said, I see, 2 new religions. I have known so many, and doubtless there have been many more since I knew aught beyond these caves of Kor. Mankind asks ever of the skies to vision out what lies behind them. It is terror for the end, and but a subtler form of selfishness. This it is that breeds religions. Mark my Holly, each religion claims the future for its followers, or at least the good thereof. The evil is for those benighted ones who will have none of it. Seeing the light the true believers worship, as the fishes see the stars, but dimly. The religions come and the religions pass, and the civilizations come and pass, and naught endures but the world and human nature. Ah! If man would but see that hope is from within and not from without, that he himself must work out his own salvation. He is there, and within him is the breath of life and a knowledge of good and evil as good and evil is to him. Thereon let him build and stand erect, and not cast himself before the image of some unknown God, modeled like his poor self, but with a bigger brain to think the evil thing, and a longer arm to do it. I thought to myself, which shows how old such reasoning is, being indeed one of the recurring qualities of theological discussion, that her argument sounded very like some that I have heard in the 19th century, and in other places than the caves of Kor, and with which, by the way, I totally disagree, but I did not care to try and discuss the question with her. To begin with, my mind was too weary with all the emotions through which I had passed, and in the second place, I knew that I should get the worst of it. It is weary work enough to argue with an ordinary materialist, who hurls statistics and whole strata of geological facts at your head, whilst you can only buffet him with deductions and instincts and the snowflakes of faith, that are, alas, so apt to melt in the hot embers of our troubles. How little chance, then, should I have against one whose brain was supernaturally sharpened, and who had 2,000 years of experience, besides all manner of knowledge of the secrets of nature at her command. Feeling that she would be more likely to convert me than I should to convert her, I thought it best to leave the matter alone, and so sat silent. Many a time since then have I bitterly regretted that I did so, for thereby I lost the only opportunity one can remember having had of ascertaining what Aisha really believed, and what her philosophy was. Well, my Holly, she continued, and so those people of mine have found a prophet, a false prophet thou sayest, for he is not thine own, and indeed I doubt it not. Yet in my day was it otherwise, for then we Arabs had many gods. Alat there was, and Saba, the host of heaven, Al-Uzza and Mana the stony one, for whom the blood of victims flowed, and Wad and Sawa, and Yagath the lion of the dwellers in Yaman, and Yak the horse of Morid, and Nasser the eagle of Hamyar. Ay, and many more. Oh, the folly of it all, the shame and the pitiful folly! Yet when I rose in wisdom and spoke thereof, surely they would have slain me in the name of their outraged gods. Well, so hath it ever been. But, my Holly, art thou weary of me already, that thou dost sit so silent? Or dost thou fear lest I should teach thee my philosophy? For know I have a philosophy. What would a teacher be without her own philosophy? And if thou dost vex me overmuch, beware. For I will have thee learn it, and thou shalt be my disciple, and we twain will found a faith that shall swallow up all others. Faithless man! And but half an hour since thou wast upon thy knees. The posture does not suit thee, Holly, swearing that thou didst love me. What shall we do? Nay, I have it. I will come and see this youth the lion, as the old man Bilali calls him, who came with thee, and who is so sick. The fever must have run its course by now, and if he is about to die I will recover him. Fear not, my Holly, I shall use no magic. Have I not told thee that there is no such thing as magic, though there is such a thing as understanding and applying the forces which are in nature? Go now, and presently, when I have made the drug ready, I will follow thee. 1. Aisha was a great chemist. Indeed, chemistry appears to have been her only amusement and occupation. She had one of the caves fitted up as a laboratory, and although her appliances were necessarily rude, the results that she attained were, as will become clear in the course of this narrative, sufficiently surprising. Accordingly I went, only to find Job and Ustane in a great state of grief, declaring that Leo was in the throes of death, and that they had been searching for me everywhere. I rushed to the couch, and glanced at him. Clearly he was dying. He was senseless, and breathing heavily, but his lips were quivering, and every now and again a little shudder ran down his frame. I knew enough of doctoring to see that in another hour he would be beyond the reach of earthly help, perhaps in another 5 minutes. How I cursed my selfishness and the folly that had kept me lingering by Aisha's side while my dear boy lay dying. Alas and alas! How easily the best of us are lighted down to evil by the gleam of a woman's eyes. What a wicked wretch was I! Actually, for the last half-hour I had scarcely thought of Leo, and this, be it remembered, of the man who for 20 years had been my dearest companion, and the chief interest of my existence. And now, perhaps, it was too late. I wrung my hands and glanced round. Ustane was sitting by the couch, and in her eyes burnt the dull light of despair. Job was blubbering. I am sorry I cannot name his distress by any more delicate word, audibly in the corner. Seeing my eye fixed upon him, he went outside to give way to his grief in the passage. Obviously the only hope lay in Aisha. She and she alone, unless indeed she was an impostor, which I could not believe, could save him. I would go and implore her to come. As I started to do so, however, Job came flying into the room, his hair literally standing on end with terror. "Oh, God help us, sir," he ejaculated in a frightened whisper. "Here's a corpse coming sliding down the passage." For a moment I was puzzled, but presently, of course, it struck me that he must have seen Aisha, wrapped in her grave-like garment, and been deceived by the extraordinary undulating smoothness of her walk into a belief that she was a white ghost gliding towards him. Indeed, at that very moment the question was settled, for Aisha herself was in the apartment, or rather cave. Job turned, and saw her sheeted form, and then, with a convulsive howl of "Here it comes!" sprang into a corner, and jammed his face against the wall, and Ustane, guessing whose the dread presence must be, prostrated herself upon her face. "Thou comest in a good time, Aisha," I said, "for my boy lies at the point of death." "So," she said softly, "provided he be not dead, it is no matter, for I can bring him back to life, my Holly. Is that man there thy servant? And is that the method wherewith thy servants greet strangers in thy country?" "He is frightened of thy garb, it hath a death-like air," I answered. She laughed. "And the girl? Ah, I see now. It is she of whom thou didst speak to me. Well, bid them both to leave us, and we will see to this sick lion of thine. I love not that underlings should perceive my wisdom." Thereon I told Ustane in Arabic and Job in English both to leave the room, an order which the latter obeyed readily enough, and was glad to obey, for he could not in any way subdue his fear. But it was otherwise with Ustane. "What does she want?" she whispered, divided between her fear of the terrible queen and her anxiety to remain near Leo. "It is surely the right of a wife to be near her husband when he dieth." "Nay, I will not go, my lord the baboon." "Why doth not that woman leave us, my Holly?" asked Aisha from the other end of the cave, where she was engaged in carelessly examining some of the sculptures on the wall. "She is not willing to leave Leo," I answered, not knowing what to say. Aisha wheeled round and, pointing to the girl Ustane, said one word, and one only, but it was quite enough, for the tone in which it was said meant volumes. "Go." And then Ustane crept past her on her hands and knees, and went. "Thou sayest, my Holly," said Aisha, with a little laugh, "it was needful that I should give these people a lesson in obedience. That girl went nigh to disobeying me, but then she did not learn this morn how I treat the disobedient. Well, she has gone, and now let me see the youth," and she glided towards the couch on which Leo lay, with his face in the shadow and turned towards the wall. "He hath a noble shape," she said, as she bent over him to look upon his face. Next second her tall and willowy form was staggering back across the room, as though she had been shot or stabbed, staggering back till at last she struck the cavern wall. And then there burst from her lips the most awful and unearthly scream that I ever heard in all my life. "What is it, Aisha?" I cried. "Is he dead?" She turned, and sprang towards me like a tigress. "Thou dog," she said in her terrible whisper, which sounded like the hiss of a snake, "why didst thou hide this from me?" And she stretched out her arm, and I thought that she was about to slay me. "What?" I ejaculated, in the most lively terror. "What?" "Ah," she said, "perchance thou didst not know. Learn, my Holly, learn. There lies my lost Callicrates. Callicrates, who has come back to me at last, as I knew he would, as I knew he would." And she began to sob and to laugh, and generally to conduct herself like any other lady who is a little upset, murmuring Callicrates, Callicrates. Nonsense, thought I to myself, but I did not like to say it. And indeed, at that moment I was thinking of Leo's life, having forgotten everything else in that terrible anxiety. What I feared now was that he should die while she was carrying on. Unless thou art able to help him, Aisha, I put in, by way of a reminder. Thy callicrates will soon be far beyond thy calling. Surely he dieth even now. True, she said with a start. Oh, why did I not come before? I am unnerved. My hand trembles, even mine, and yet it is very easy. Here, thou Holly, take this phial, and she produced a tiny jar of pottery from the folds of her garment, and pour the liquid in it down his throat. It will cure him if he be not dead. Swift now. Swift. The man dies. I glanced towards him. It was true enough. Leo was in his death struggle. I saw his poor face turning ashen, and heard the breath begin to rattle in his throat. The phial was stoppered with a little piece of wood. I drew it with my teeth, and a drop of the fluid within flew out upon my tongue. It had a sweet flavor, and for a second made my head swim, and a mist gather before my eyes, but happily the effect passed away as swiftly as it had arisen. When I reached Leo's side, he was plainly expiring. His golden head was slowly turning from side to side, and his mouth was slightly open. I called to Aisha to hold his head, and this she managed to do, though the woman was quivering from head to foot, like an aspen leaf or a startled horse. Then, forcing the jaw a little more open, I poured the contents of the phial into his mouth. Instantly a little vapor arose from it, as happens when one disturbs nitric acid, and this sight did not increase my hopes, already faint enough, of the efficacy of the treatment. One thing, however, was certain: the death throes ceased. At first I thought because he had got beyond them, and crossed the awful river. His face turned to a livid pallor, and his heartbeats, which had been feeble enough before, seemed to die away altogether. Only the eyelids still twitched a little. In my doubt I looked up at Aisha, whose head wrapping had slipped back in her excitement when she went reeling across the room. She was still holding Leo's head, and with a face as pale as his own, watching his countenance with such an expression of agonized anxiety as I had never seen before. Clearly she did not know if he would live or die. 5 minutes slowly passed, and I saw that she was abandoning hope. Her lovely oval face seemed to fall in and grow visibly thinner beneath the pressure of a mental agony, whose pencil drew black lines about the hollows of her eyes. The coral faded even from her lips, till they were as white as Leo's face, and quivered pitifully. It was shocking to see her. Even in my own grief I felt for hers. Is it too late? I gasped. She hid her face in her hands, and made no answer, and I too turned away. But as I did so I heard a deep-drawn breath, and looking down perceived a line of color creeping up Leo's face, then another, and then, wonder of wonders, the man we had thought dead turned over on his side. Thou sayest, I said in a whisper. I see, she answered hoarsely. He is saved. I thought we were too late. Another moment, one little moment more, and he had been gone. And she burst into an awful flood of tears, sobbing as though her heart would break, and yet looking lovelier than ever as she did it. At last she ceased. Forgive me, my Holly, forgive me for my weakness, she said. Thou sayest after all I am a very woman. Think of it. This morning didst thou speak of the place of torment appointed by this new religion of thine. Hell or Hades thou didst call it. A place where the vital essence lives and retains an individual memory, and where all the errors and faults of judgment, and unsatisfied passions and the unsubstantial terrors of the mind wherewith it hath at any time had to do, come to mock and haunt and gibe and wring the heart forever and forever with the vision of its own hopelessness. Thus, even thus, have I lived for full 2,000 years, for some 66 generations as ye reckon time, in a hell, as thou callest it, tormented by the memory of a crime, tortured day and night with an unfulfilled desire, without companionship, without comfort, without death, and led on only down my dreary road by the marsh lights of hope, which, though they flickered here and there, and now glowed strong, and now were not, yet, as my skill told me, would one day lead unto my deliverer. And then think of it still, O Holly, for never shalt thou hear such another tale, or see such another scene, nay, not even if I give thee 10,000 years of life. And thou shalt have it in payment if thou wilt. Think. At last my deliverer came, he for whom I had watched and waited through the generations. At the appointed time he came to seek me, as I knew that he must come, for my wisdom could not err, though I knew not when or how. Yet see how ignorant I was. See how small my knowledge, and how faint my strength. For hours he lay there sick unto death, and I felt it not. I who had waited for him for 2,000 years, I knew it not. And then at last I see him, and behold, my chance is gone but by a hair's breadth even before I have it. For he is in the very jaws of death, whence no power of mine can draw him. And if he die, surely must the hell be lived through once more. Once more must I face the weary centuries and wait till the time in its fullness shall bring my beloved back to me. And then thou gavest him the medicine, and that 5 minutes dragged long before I knew if he would live or die. And I tell thee that all the 60 generations that are gone were not so long as that 5 minutes. But they passed at length, and still he showed no sign, and I knew that if the drug works not then, so far as I have had knowledge, it works not at all. Then thought I that he was once more dead, and all the tortures of all the years gathered themselves into a single venomed spear, and pierced me through and through, because again I had lost Callicrates. And then when all was done, behold, he sighed, behold, he lived, and I knew that he would live, for none die on whom the drug takes hold. Think of it now, my Holly, think of the wonder of it. He will sleep for 12 hours and then the fever will have left him. She stopped, and laid her hand upon his golden head, and then bent down and kissed his brow with a chastened abandonment of tenderness that would have been beautiful to behold had not the sight cut me to the heart, for I was jealous. 18. Go, woman. Then followed a silence of a minute or so, during which she appeared, if one might judge from the almost angelic rapture of her face, for she looked angelic sometimes, to be plunged into a happy ecstasy. Suddenly, however, a new thought struck her, and her expression became the very reverse of angelic. Almost had I forgotten, she said. That woman, Ustane. What is she to Callicrates, his servant, or? And she paused, and her voice trembled. I shrugged my shoulders. I understand that she is wed to him according to the custom of the Haggard, I answered, but I know not. Her face grew dark as a thundercloud. Old as she was, Aisha had not outlived jealousy. Then there is an end, she said. She must die even now. For what crime? I asked, horrified. She is guilty of naught that thou art not guilty of thyself, O Aisha. She loves the man, and he has been pleased to accept her love. Where then is her sin? Truly, O Holly, thou art foolish, she answered, almost petulantly. Where is her sin? Her sin is that she stands between me and my desire. Well, I know that I can take him from her, for dwells there a man upon this earth, O Holly, who could resist me if I put out my strength? Men are faithful for so long only as temptations pass them by. If the temptation be but strong enough, then will the man yield, for every man, like every rope, hath his breaking strain, and passion is to men what gold and power are to women, the weight upon their weakness. Believe me, ill will it go with mortal woman in that heaven of which thou speakest, if only the spirits be more fair, for their lords will never turn to look upon them, and their heaven will become their hell. For man can be bought with woman's beauty, if it be but beautiful enough, and woman's beauty can be ever bought with gold, if only there be gold enough. So was it in my day, and so it will be to the end of time. The world is a great mart, my Holly, where all things are for sale to him who bids the highest in the currency of our desires. These remarks, which were as cynical as might have been expected from a woman of Aisha's age and experience, jarred upon me, and I answered, testily, that in our heaven there was no marriage or giving in marriage. Else would it not be heaven, dost thou mean? She put in. Fie on thee, Holly, to think so ill of us poor women. Is it, then, marriage that marks the line between thy heaven and thy hell? But enough of this. This is no time for disputing and the challenge of our wits. Why dost thou always dispute? Art thou also a philosopher of these latter days? As for this woman, she must die, for though I can take her lover from her, yet, while she lived, might he think tenderly of her, and that I cannot away with. No other woman shall dwell in my lord's thoughts. My empire shall be all my own. She hath had her day, let her be content. For better is an hour with love than a century of loneliness. Now the night shall swallow her. Nay, nay, I cried. It would be a wicked crime. And from a crime naught comes but what is evil. For thine own sake do not this deed. Is it then a crime, O foolish man, to put away that which stands between us and our ends? Then is our life one long crime, my Holly, since day by day we destroy that we may live. Since in this world none save the strongest can endure. Those who are weak must perish. The earth is to the strong, and the fruits thereof. For every tree that grows a score shall wither, that the strong one may take their share. We run to place and power over the dead bodies of those who fail and fall. Aye, we win the food we eat from out of the mouths of starving babes. It is the scheme of things. Thou sayest, too, that a crime breeds evil, but therein thou dost lack experience. For out of crimes come many good things, and out of good grows much evil. The cruel rage of the tyrant may prove a blessing to the thousands who come after him, and the sweetheartness of a holy man may make a nation slaves. Man doeth this, and doeth that from the good or evil of his heart, but he knoweth not to what end his moral sense doth prompt him. For when he striketh he is blind to where the blow shall fall, nor can he count the airy threads that weave the web of circumstance. Good and evil, love and hate, night and day, sweet and bitter, man and woman, heaven above and the earth beneath. All these things are necessary, one to the other, and who knows the end of each? I tell thee that there is a hand of fate that twines them up to bear the burden of its purpose, and all things are gathered in that great rope to which all things are needful. Therefore doth it not become us to say this thing is evil and this good, or the dark is hateful and the light lovely. For to other eyes than ours the evil may be the good and the darkness more beautiful than the day, or all alike be fair. Hearest thou my Holly? I felt it was hopeless to argue against casuistry of this nature, which, if it were carried to its logical conclusion, would absolutely destroy all morality, as we understand it. But her talk gave me a fresh thrill of fear. For what may not be possible to a being who, unconstrained by human law, is also absolutely unshackled by a moral sense of right and wrong, which, however partial and conventional it may be, is yet based, as our conscience tells us, upon the great wall of individual responsibility that marks off mankind from the beasts? But I was deeply anxious to save Ustane, whom I liked and respected, from the dire fate that overshadowed her at the hands of her mighty rival. So I made one more appeal. Aisha, I said, thou art too subtle for me, but thou thyself hast told me that each man should be a law unto himself, and follow the teaching of his heart. Hath thy heart no mercy towards her whose place thou wouldst take? Bethink thee, as thou sayest, though to me the thing is incredible, he whom thou desirest has returned to thee after many ages, and but now thou hast, as thou sayest also, wrung him from the jaws of death. Wilt thou celebrate his coming by the murder of one who loved him, and whom perchance he loved, one at the least, who saved his life for thee when the spears of thy slaves would have made an end thereof? Thou sayest also that in past days thou didst grievously wrong this man, that with thine own hand thou didst slay him because of the Egyptian Aminardas whom he loved. How knowest thou that, O stranger? How knowest thou that name? I spoke it not to thee. She broke in with a cry, catching at my arm. Perchance I dreamed it, I answered. Strange dreams do hover about these caves of Kor. It seems that the dream was, indeed, a shadow of the truth. What came to thee of thy mad crime? 2,000 years of waiting, was it not? And now wouldst thou repeat the history? Say what thou wilt. I tell thee that evil will come of it. For to him who doeth, at the least, good breeds good and evil evil, even though in after days out of evil cometh good. Offenses must needs come, but woe to him by whom the offense cometh. So said that Messiah of whom I spoke to thee, and it was truly said. If thou slayest this innocent woman, I say unto thee that thou shalt be accursed, and pluck no fruit from thine ancient tree of love. Also what thinkest thou? How will this man take thee red-handed from the slaughter of her who loved and tended him? As to that, she answered, I have already answered thee. Had I slain thee as well as her, yet should he love me, Holly, because he could not save himself therefrom any more than thou couldst save thyself from dying, if by chance I slew thee, O Holly. And yet maybe there is truth in what thou dost say, for in some way it presseth on my mind. If it may be, I will spare this woman, for have I not told thee that I am not cruel for the sake of cruelty? I love not to see suffering, or to cause it. Let her come before me, quick now before my mood changes. And she hastily covered her face with its gauzy wrapping. Well pleased to have succeeded even to this extent, I passed out into the passage and called to Ustane, whose white garment I caught sight of some yards away, huddled up against one of the earthenware lamps that were placed at intervals along the tunnel. She rose and ran towards me. Is my lord dead? Oh, say not he is dead, she cried, lifting her noble-looking face, all stained as it was with tears. up to me with an air of infinite beseeching that went straight to my heart. Nay, he lives, I answered. She hath saved him. Enter. She sighed deeply, entered, and fell upon her hands and knees, after the custom of the Haggard people. In the presence of the dread she. Stand, said Aisha in her coldest voice, and come hither. Ustane obeyed, standing before her with bowed head. Then came a pause which Aisha broke. Who is this man? She said, pointing to the sleeping form of Leo. The man is my husband, she answered in a low voice. Who gave him to thee for a husband? I took him according to the custom of our country, O she. Thou hast done evil, woman, in taking this man who is a stranger. He is not a man of thine own race, and the custom fails. Listen, perchance thou didst this thing through ignorance, therefore, woman, do I spare thee, otherwise hadst thou died. Listen again. Go from hence back to thine own place, and never dare to speak to or set thine eyes upon this man again. He is not for thee. Listen a third time. If thou breakest this my law, that moment thou deest. Go. But Ustane did not move. Go, woman. Then she looked up, and I saw that her face was torn with passion. Nay, O she. I will not go, she answered in a choked voice. The man is my husband, and I love him, and I will not leave him. What right hast thou to command me to leave my husband? I saw a little quiver pass down Aisha's frame, and shuddered myself, fearing the worst. Be pitiful, I said in Latin. It is but nature working. I am pitiful, she answered coldly in the same language. Had I not been pitiful, she had been dead even now. Then, addressing Ustane, Woman, I say to thee, go before I destroy thee where thou art. I will not go. He is mine, she cried in anguish. I took him, and I saved his life. Destroy me, then, if thou hast the power. I will not give thee my husband, never, never. Aisha made a movement so swift that I could scarcely follow it, but it seemed to me that she lightly struck the poor girl upon the head with her hand. I looked at Ustane, and then staggered back in horror, for there upon her hair, right across her bronze-like tresses, were 3 finger marks white as snow. As for the girl herself, she had put her hands to her head, and was looking dazed. Great heavens! I said, perfectly aghast at this dreadful manifestation of human power, but she did but laugh a little. Thou thinkest, poor ignorant fool, she said to the bewildered woman, that I have not the power to slay. Stay, there lies a mirror, and she pointed to Leo's round shaving glass that had been arranged by Job with other things upon his portmanteau. Give it to this woman, my Holly, and let her see that which lies across her hair, and whether or no I have power to slay. I picked up the glass, and held it before Ustane's eyes. She gazed, then felt at her hair, then gazed again, and then sank upon the ground with a sort of sob. Now wilt thou go, or must I strike a second time? Asked Aisha in mockery. Look, I have set my seal upon thee so that I may know thee till thy hair is all as white as it. If I see thy face again, be sure too, that thy bones shall soon be whiter than my mark upon thy hair. Utterly awed and broken down, the poor creature rose, and marked with that awful mark, crept from the room, sobbing bitterly. Look not so fright, my Holly, said Aisha, when she had gone. I tell thee I deal not in magic. There is no such thing. 'Tis only a force that thou dost not understand. I marked her to strike terror to her heart, else must I have slain her. And now I will bid my servants to bear my lord Callicrates to a chamber near mine own, that I may watch over him, and be ready to greet him when he wakes. And thither, too, shalt thou come, my Holly, and the white man thy servant. But one thing remember at thy peril. Naught shalt thou say to Callicrates as to how this woman went, and as little as may be of me. Now I have warned thee. And she slid away to give her orders, leaving me more absolutely confounded than ever. Indeed, so bewildered was I, and racked and torn with such a succession of various emotions, that I began to think that I must be going mad. However, perhaps fortunately, I had but little time to reflect, for presently the mutes arrived to carry the sleeping Leo and our possessions across the central cave. So for a while all was bustle. Our new rooms were situated immediately behind what we used to call Aisha's boudoir, the curtained space where I had first seen her. Where she herself slept I did not then know, but it was somewhere quite close. That night I passed in Leo's room, but he slept through it like the dead, never once stirring. I also slept fairly well, as indeed I needed to do, but my sleep was full of dreams of all the horrors and wonders I had undergone. Chiefly, however, I was haunted by that frightful piece of diablerie by which Aisha left her finger marks upon her rival's hair. There was something so terrible about her swift snake-like movement, and the instantaneous blanching of that threefold line, that if the results to Ustane had been much more tremendous, I doubt if they would have impressed me so deeply. To this day I often dream of that awful scene, and see the weeping woman, bereaved and marked like Cain, cast a last look at her lover, and creep from the presence of her dread queen. Another dream that troubled me originated in the huge pyramid of bones. I dreamed that they all stood up and marched past me in thousands and tens of thousands, in squadrons, companies, and armies, with the sunlight shining through their hollow ribs. On they rushed across the plain to Kor, their imperial home. I saw the drawbridges fall before them, and heard their bones clank through the brazen gates. On they went, up the splendid streets, on past fountains, palaces, and temples such as the eye of man never saw. But there was no man to greet them in the marketplace, and no woman's face appeared at the windows. Only a bodiless voice went before them, calling, "Fallen is imperial Kor! Fallen, fallen, fallen!" On, right through the city, marched those gleaming phalanxes, and the rattle of their bony tread echoed through the silent air as they pressed grimly on. They passed through the city and clomb the wall, and marched along the great roadway that was made upon the wall, till at length they once more reached the drawbridge. Then, as the sun was sinking, they returned again towards their sepulchre, and luridly his light shone in the sockets of their empty eyes, throwing gigantic shadows of their bones, that stretched away, and crept like huge spiders' legs as their armies wound across the plain. Then they came to the cave, and once more one by one flung themselves in unending files through the hole into the pit of bones, and I awoke, shuddering, to see she, who had evidently been standing between my couch and Leo's, glide like a shadow from the room. After this I slept again, soundly this time, till morning, when I awoke much refreshed, and got up. At last the hour drew near at which, according to Aisha, Leo was to awake, and with it came she herself, as usual, veiled. "Thou shalt see, O Holly," she said. "Presently shall he awake in his right mind, the fever having left him." Hardly were the words out of her mouth, when Leo turned round and stretched out his arms, yawned, opened his eyes, and perceiving a female form bending over him, threw his arms round her and kissed her, mistaking her, perhaps, for Ustane. "At any rate," he said in Arabic, "Hello, Ustane, why have you tied your head up like that? Have you got the toothache?" And then in English, "I say, I'm awfully hungry." "Why, Job, you old son of a gun, where the deuce have we got to now?" "I am sure I wish I knew, Mr. Leo," said Job, edging suspiciously past Aisha, whom he still regarded with the utmost disgust and horror, being by no means sure that she was not an animated corpse. "But you mustn't talk, Mr. Leo, you've been very ill, and given us a great deal of anxiety, and if this lady," looking at Aisha, "would be so kind as to move, I'll bring you your soup." This turned Leo's attention to the lady, who was standing by in perfect silence. "Hello," he said, "that is not Ustane. Where is Ustane?" Then, for the first time, Aisha spoke to him, and her first words were a lie. "She has gone from hence upon a visit," she said. "And behold, in her place am I here as thine handmaiden." Aisha's silver notes seemed to puzzle Leo's half-awakened intellect, as also did her corpse-like wrappings. However, he said nothing at the time, but drank off his soup greedily enough, and then turned over and slept again till the evening. When he woke for the second time he saw me, and began to question me as to what had happened, but I had to put him off as best I could till the morrow, when he awoke almost miraculously better. Then I told him something of his illness and of my doings, but as Aisha was present I could not tell him much except that she was the queen of the country, and well disposed towards us, and that it was her pleasure to go veiled. For, though of course I spoke in English, I was afraid that she might understand what we were saying from the expression of our faces, and besides, I remembered her warning. On the following day Leo got up almost entirely recovered. The flesh wound in his side was healed, and his constitution, naturally a vigorous one, had shaken off the exhaustion consequent on his terrible fever with a rapidity that I can only attribute to the effects of the wonderful drug which Aisha had given to him, and also to the fact that his illness had been too short to reduce him very much. With his returning health came back full recollection of all his adventures up to the time when he had lost consciousness in the marsh, and of course of Ustane also, to whom I had discovered he had grown considerably attached. Indeed, he overwhelmed me with questions about the poor girl, which I did not dare to answer, for after Leo's first awakening she had sent for me, and again warned me solemnly that I was to reveal nothing of the story to him, delicately hinting that if I did it would be the worse for me. She also, for the second time, cautioned me not to tell Leo anything more than I was obliged about herself, saying that she would reveal herself to him in her own time. Indeed, her whole manner changed. After all that I had seen, I had expected that she would take the earliest opportunity of claiming the man she believed to be her old-world lover, but this, for some reason of her own, which was at the time quite inscrutable to me, she did not do. All that she did was to attend to his wants quietly, and with a humility which was in striking contrast with her former imperious bearing, addressing him always in a tone of something very like respect, and keeping him with her as much as possible. Of course his curiosity was as much excited about this mysterious woman as my own had been, and he was particularly anxious to see her face, which I had, without entering into particulars, told him was as lovely as her form and voice. This in itself was enough to raise the expectations of any young man to a dangerous pitch, and had it not been that he had not as yet completely shaken off the effects of illness, and was much troubled in his mind about Ustane, of whose affection and brave devotion he spoke in touching terms, I have no doubt that he would have entered into her plans, and fallen in love with her by anticipation. As it was, however, he was simply wildly curious, and also, like myself, considerably odd, for though no hint had been given to him by Aisha of her extraordinary age, he not unnaturally came to identify her with the woman spoken of on the potsherd. At last, quite driven into a corner by his continual questions, which he showered on me while he was dressing on this third morning, I referred him to Aisha, saying, with perfect truth, that I did not know where Ustane was. Accordingly, after Leo had eaten a hearty breakfast, we adjourned into she's presence, for her mutes had orders to admit us at all hours. She was, as usual, seated in what, for want of a better term, we called her boudoir, and on the curtains being drawn she rose from her couch and, stretching out both hands, came forward to greet us, or rather Leo, for I, as may be imagined, was now quite left in the cold. It was a pretty sight to see her veiled form gliding towards the sturdy young Englishman, dressed in his grey flannel suit. For though he is half a Greek in blood, Leo is, with the exception of his hair, one of the most English-looking men I ever saw. He has nothing of the subtle form or slippery manner of the modern Greek about him, though I presume that he got his remarkable personal beauty from his foreign mother, whose portrait he resembles not a little. He is very tall and big-chested, and yet not awkward, as so many big men are, and his head is set upon him in such a fashion as to give him a proud and vigorous air, which was well translated in his Haggard name of the lion. "Greeting to thee, my young stranger lord," she said in her softest voice. "Right glad am I to see thee upon thy feet. Believe me, had I not saved thee at the last, never wouldst thou have stood upon those feet again. But the danger is done, and it shall be my care," and she flung a world of meaning into the words, "that it doth return no more." Leo bowed to her, and then in his best Arabic, thanked her for all her kindness and courtesy in caring for one unknown to her. "Nay," she answered softly, "oh, could the world spare such a man? Beauty is too rare upon it. Give me no thanks, who am made happy by thy coming." "Humph, old fellow," said Leo aside to me in English, "the lady is very civil. We seem to have tumbled into clover. I hope that you have made the most of your opportunities. By Jove, what a pair of arms she has got." I nudged him in the ribs to make him keep quiet, for I caught sight of a gleam from Aisha's veiled eyes, which were regarding me curiously. "I trust," went on Aisha, "that my servants have attended well upon thee. If there can be comfort in this poor place, be sure it waits on thee. Is there aught that I can do for thee more?" "Yes, oh she," answered Leo hastily. "I would fain know whither the young lady who was looking after me has gone to." "Ah," said Aisha. "The girl, yes, I saw her. Nay, I know not. She said that she would go, I know not whither. Perchance she will return, perchance not. It is wearisome waiting on the sick, and these savage women are fickle." Leo looked both sulky and distressed at this intelligence. "It's very odd," he said to me in English, and then addressing she, "I cannot understand," he said. "The young lady and I, well, in short, we had a regard for each other." Aisha laughed a little very musically, and then turned the subject. 19. Give me a black goat. The conversation after this was of such a desultory order that I do not quite recollect it. For some reason, perhaps from a desire to keep her identity and character in reserve, Aisha did not talk freely, as she usually did. Presently, however, she informed Leo that she had arranged a dance that night for our amusement. I was astonished to hear this, as I fancied that the Haggard were much too gloomy a folk to indulge in any such frivolity, but as will presently more clearly appear, it turned out that an Haggard dance has little in common with such fantastic festivities in other countries, savage or civilized. Then, as we were about to withdraw, she suggested that Leo might like to see some of the wonders of the caves, and as he gladly assented thither we departed, accompanied by Job and Bilali. To describe our visit would only be to repeat a great deal of what I have already said. The tombs we entered were indeed different, for the whole rock was a honeycomb of sepulchres. But the contents were nearly always similar. Afterwards we visited the pyramid of bones that had haunted my dreams on the previous night, and from thence went down a long passage to one of the great vaults occupied by the bodies of the poorer citizens of imperial corps. These bodies were not nearly so well preserved as were those of the wealthier classes. Many of them had no linen covering on them. Also they were buried from 500 to 1,000 in a single large vault, the corpses in some instances being thickly piled one upon another, like a heap of slain. For a long while it puzzled me to know what could have been done with the enormous quantities of rock that must have been dug out of these vast caves, but I afterwards discovered that it was for the most part built into the walls and palaces of corps, and also used to line the reservoirs and sewers that L.H.H. Leo was of course intensely interested in this stupendous and unequaled sight, which was, indeed, enough to awake all the imagination a man had in him into the most active life. But to poor Job it did not prove attractive. His nerves, already seriously shaken by what he had undergone since we had arrived in this terrible country, were, as may be imagined, still further disturbed by the spectacle of these masses of departed humanity, whereof the forms still remained perfect before his eyes, though their voices were forever lost in the eternal silence of the tomb. Nor was he comforted when old Bilali, by way of soothing his evident agitation, informed him that he should not be frightened of these dead things, as he would soon be like them himself. "There's a nice thing to say of a man, sir," he ejaculated, when I translated this little remark. "But there, what can one expect of an old man-eating savage? Not but what I dare say he's right." And Job sighed. When we had finished inspecting the caves, we returned and had our meal, for it was now past 4 in the afternoon, and we all, especially Leo, needed some food and rest. At 6 o'clock we, together with Job, waited on Aisha, who set to work to terrify our poor servant still further, by showing him pictures on the pool of water in the font-like vessel. She learnt from me that he was one of 17 children, and then bid him think of all his brothers and sisters, or as many of them as he could, gathered together in his father's cottage. Then she told him to look in the water, and there, reflected from its stilly surface, was that dead scene of many years gone by, as it was recalled to our retainer's brain. Some of the faces were clear enough, but some were mere blurs and splotches, or with one feature grossly exaggerated. The fact being that, in these instances, Job had been unable to recall the exact appearances of the individuals, or remembered them only by a peculiarity of his tribe, and the water could only reflect what he saw with his mind's eye. For it must be remembered that she's power in this matter was strictly limited. She could apparently, except in very rare instances, only photograph upon the water what was actually in the mind of someone present, and then only by his will. But if she was personally acquainted with a locality, she could, as in the case of ourselves and the whaleboat, throw its reflection upon the water, and also, it seems, the reflection of anything extraneous that was passing there at the time. This power, however, did not extend to the minds of others. For instance, she could show me the interior of my college chapel, as I remembered it, but not as it was at the moment of reflection. For where other people were concerned, her art was strictly limited to the facts or memories present to their consciousness at the moment. So much was this so that when we tried, for her amusement, to show her pictures of noted buildings, such as St. Paul's or the Houses of Parliament. The result was most imperfect. For of course, though we had a good general idea of their appearance, we could not recall all the architectural details, and therefore the minutiae necessary to a perfect reflection were wanting. But Job could not be got to understand this, and so far from accepting a natural explanation of the matter, which was after all, though strange enough in all conscience, nothing more than an instance of glorified and perfected telepathy, he set the whole thing down as a manifestation of the blackest magic. I shall never forget the howl of terror which he uttered when he saw the more or less perfect portraits of his long-scattered brethren staring at him from the quiet water, or the merry peal of laughter with which Aisha greeted his consternation. As for Leo, he did not altogether like it either, but ran his fingers through his yellow curls, and remarked that it gave him the creeps. After about an hour of this amusement, in the latter part of which Job did not participate, the mutes by signs indicated that Bilali was waiting for an audience. Accordingly he was told to crawl up, which he did as awkwardly as usual, and announced that the dance was ready to begin if she and the white strangers would be pleased to attend. Shortly afterwards we all rose, and Aisha having thrown a dark cloak, the same, by the way, that she had worn when I saw her cursing by the fire, over her white wrappings, we started. The dance was to be held in the open air, on the smooth rocky plateau in front of the great cave, and thither we made our way. About 15 paces from the mouth of the cave we found 3 chairs placed, and here we sat and waited, for as yet no dancers were to be seen. The night was almost, but not quite dark, the moon not having risen as yet, which made us wonder how we should be able to see the dancing. "Thou wilt presently understand," said Aisha, with a little laugh, when Leo asked her. And we certainly did. Scarcely were the words out of her mouth when from every point we saw dark forms rushing up, each bearing with him what we at first took to be an enormous flaming torch. Whatever they were burning furiously, for the flames stood out a yard or more behind each bearer. On they came, 50 or more of them, carrying their flaming burdens and looking like so many devils from hell. Leo was the first to discover what these burdens were. "Great heaven," he said, "they are corpses on fire." I stared and stared again. He was perfectly right. The torches that were to light our entertainment were human mummies from the caves. On rushed the bearers of the flaming corpses, and meeting at a spot about 20 paces in front of us, built their ghastly burdens crossways into a huge bonfire. Heavens! How they roared and flared! No tar barrel could have burnt as those mummies did. Nor was this all. Suddenly I saw one great fellow seize a flaming human arm that had fallen from its parent frame, and rush off into the darkness. Presently he stopped, and a tall streak of fire shot up into the air, illumining the gloom, and also the lamp from which it sprang. That lamp was the mummy of a woman tied to a stout stake let into the rock, and he had fired her hair. On he went a few paces and touched a second, then a third, and a fourth, till at last we were surrounded on all 3 sides by a great ring of bodies flaring furiously, the material with which they were preserved having rendered them so inflammable that the flames would literally spout out of the ears and mouth in tongues of fire a foot or more in length. Nero illuminated his gardens with live Christians soaked in tar, and we were now treated to a similar spectacle, probably for the first time since his day, only happily our lamps were not living ones. But, although this element of horror was fortunately wanting, to describe the awful and hideous grandeur of the spectacle thus presented to us is, I feel, so absolutely beyond my poor powers that I scarcely dare attempt it. To begin with, it appealed to the moral as well as the physical susceptibilities. There was something very terrible, and yet very fascinating, about the employment of the remote dead to illumine the orgies of the living. In itself the thing was a satire, both on the living and the dead. Caesar's dust, or is it Alexander's? May stop a bunghole, but the functions of these dead Caesars of the past was to light up a savage fetish dance. To such base uses may we come. Of so little account may we be in the minds of the eager multitudes that we shall breed, many of whom, so far from revering our memory, will live to curse us for begetting them into such a world of woe. Then there was the physical side of the spectacle, and a weird and splendid one it was. Those old citizens of Kor burnt as, to judge from their sculptures and inscriptions, they had lived, very fast, and with the utmost liberality. What is more, there were plenty of them. As soon as ever a mummy had burnt down to the ankles, which it did in about 20 minutes, the feet were kicked away, and another one put in its place. The bonfire was kept going on the same generous scale, and its flames shot up, with a hiss and a crackle, 20 or 30 feet into the air, throwing great flashes of light far out into the gloom, through which the dark forms of the Haggard flitted to and fro like devils replenishing the infernal fires. We all stood and stared aghast, shocked, and yet fascinated at so strange a spectacle, and half expecting to see the spirits those flaming forms had once enclosed come creeping from the shadows to work vengeance on their desecrators. "I promised thee a strange sight, my Holly," laughed Aisha, whose nerves alone did not seem to be affected. "And behold, I have not failed thee. Also it hath its lesson. Trust not to the future, for who knows what the future may bring. Therefore, live for the day, and endeavor not to escape the dust which seems to be man's end. What thinkest thou those long-forgotten nobles and ladies would have felt had they known that they should one day flare to light the dance or boil the pot of savages? But see, here come the dancers, a merry crew, are they not? The stage is lit, now for the play." As she spoke, we perceived 2 lines of figures, one male and the other female, to the number of about 100, each advancing round the human bonfire, arrayed only in the usual leopard and buck skins. They formed up, in perfect silence, in 2 lines, facing each other between us and the fire, and then the dance, a sort of infernal and fiendish can-can, began. To describe it is quite impossible, but though there was a good deal of tossing of legs and double shuffling, it seemed to our untutored minds to be more of a play than a dance, and as usual with this dreadful people, whose minds seem to have taken their color from the caves in which they live, and whose jokes and amusements are drawn from the inexhaustible stores of preserved mortality with which they share their homes, the subject appeared to be a most ghastly one. I know that it represented an attempted murder first of all, and then the burial alive of the victim and his struggling from the grave, each act of the abominable drama, which was carried on in perfect silence, being rounded off and finished with a furious and most revolting dance round the supposed victim, who writhed upon the ground in the red light of the bonfire. Presently, however, this pleasing piece was interrupted. Suddenly there was a slight commotion, and a large powerful woman, whom I had noted as one of the most vigorous of the dancers, came, made mad and drunken with unholy excitement, bounding and staggering towards us, shrieking out as she came, "I want a black goat! I must have a black goat! Bring me a black goat!" And down she fell upon the rocky floor, foaming and writhing, and shrieking for a black goat, about as hideous a spectacle as can well be conceived. Instantly most of the dancers came up and got round her, though some still continued their capers in the background. "She has got a devil," called out one of them. "Run and get a black goat. There, devil, keep quiet. Keep quiet. You shall have the goat presently. They have gone to fetch it, devil." "I want a black goat. I must have a black goat," shrieked the foaming rolling creature again. "All right, devil. The goat will be here presently. Keep quiet, there's a good devil." And so on till the goat, taken from a neighboring kraal, did at last arrive, being dragged bleeding on to the scene by its horns. "Is it a black one? Is it a black one?" shrieked the possessed. "Yes, yes, devil, as black as night." Then aside, "Keep it behind thee, don't let the devil see that it has got a white spot on its rump and another on its belly. In 1 minute, devil. There, cut his throat quick. Where is the saucer? The goat. The goat. The goat. Give me the blood of my black goat. I must have it. Don't you see I must have it? Oh, oh, oh. Give me the blood of the goat." At this moment a terrified Ba announced that the poor goat had been sacrificed, and the next minute a woman ran up with a saucer full of blood. This the possessed creature, who was then raving and foaming her wildest, seized and drank, and was instantly recovered, and without a trace of hysteria, or fits, or being possessed, or whatever dreadful thing it was she was suffering from. She stretched her arms, smiled faintly, and walked quietly back to the dancers, who presently withdrew in a double line as they had come, leaving the space between us and the bonfire deserted. I thought that the entertainment was now over, and feeling rather queer, was about to ask she if we could rise, when suddenly what at first I took to be a baboon came hopping round the fire, and was instantly met upon the other side by a lion, or rather a human being dressed in a lion's skin. Then came a goat, then a man wrapped in an ox's hide, with the horns wobbling about in a ludicrous way. After him followed a blesbok, then an impala, then a kudu, then more goats, and many other animals, including a girl sewn up in the shining scaly hide of a boa constrictor, several yards of which trailed along the ground behind her. When all the beasts had collected, they began to dance about in a lumbering, unnatural fashion, and to imitate the sounds produced by the respective animals they represented, till the whole air was alive with roars and bleating and the hissing of snakes. This went on for a long time, till, getting tired of the pantomime, I asked Aisha if there would be any objection to Leo and myself walking round to inspect the human torches, and as she had nothing to say against it, we started, striking round to the left. After looking at one or two of the flaming bodies, we were about to return, thoroughly disgusted with the grotesque weirdness of the spectacle, when our attention was attracted by one of the dancers, a particularly active leopard, that had separated itself from its fellow beasts, and was whisking about in our immediate neighborhood, but gradually drawing into a spot where the shadow was darkest, equidistant between two of the flaming mummies. Drawn by curiosity, we followed it, when suddenly it darted past us into the shadows beyond, and as it did so erected itself and whispered, "Come," in a voice that we both recognized as that of Ustane. Without waiting to consult me, Leo turned and followed her into the outer darkness, and I, feeling sick enough at heart, went after them. The leopard crawled on for about 50 paces, a sufficient distance to be quite beyond the light of the fire and torches, and then Leo came up with it, or, rather, with Ustane. "Oh, my lord," I heard her whisper, "so I have found thee. Listen. I am in peril of my life from she who must be obeyed. Surely the baboon has told thee how she drove me from thee? I love thee, my lord, and thou art mine according to the custom of the country. I saved thy life. My lion, wilt thou cast me off now?" "Of course not," ejaculated Leo. "I have been wondering whither thou hadst gone. Let us go and explain matters to the queen." "Nay, nay, she would slay us. Thou knowest not her power. The baboon there, he knoweth, for he saw. Nay, there is but one way. If thou wilt cleave to me, thou must flee with me across the marshes even now, and then perchance we may escape." "For heaven's sake, Leo," I began, but she broke in. "Nay, listen not to him. Swift, be swift, death is in the air we breathe. Even now, mayhap, she heareth us." And without more ado she proceeded to back her arguments by throwing herself into his arms. As she did so, the leopard's head slipped from her hair, and I saw the 3 white finger marks upon it, gleaming faintly in the starlight. Once more realizing the desperate nature of the position, I was about to interpose, for I knew that Leo was not too strong-minded where women were concerned, when oh, horror! I heard a little silvery laugh behind me. I turned round, and there was she herself, and with her Bilali and 2 male mutes. I gasped and nearly sank to the ground, for I knew that such a situation must result in some dreadful tragedy, of which it seemed exceedingly probable to me that I should be the first victim. As for Ustane, she untwined her arms and covered her eyes with her hands, while Leo, not knowing the full terror of the position, merely covered up, and looked as foolish as a man caught in such a trap would naturally do. XX. Triumph. Then followed a moment of the most painful silence that I ever endured. It was broken by Aisha, who addressed herself to Leo. "Nay now, my lord and guest," she said in her softest tones, which yet had the ring of steel about them, "look not so bashful. Surely the sight was a pretty one, the leopard and the lion." "Oh, hang it all," said Leo in English. "And thou, Ustane," she went on, "surely I should have passed thee by, had not the light fallen on the white across thy hair." And she pointed to the bright edge of the rising moon which was now appearing above the horizon. "Well, well, the dance is done. See, the tapers have burnt down, and all things end in silence and in ashes. So thou thoughtest it a fit time for love, Ustane, my servant, and I, dreaming not that I could be disobeyed, thought thee already far away." "Play not with me," moaned the wretched woman. "Slay me, and let there be an end." "Nay, why? It is not well to go so swift from the hot lips of love down to the cold mouth of the grave." And she made a motion to the mutes, who instantly stepped up and caught the girl by either arm. With an oath Leo sprang upon the nearest, and hurled him to the ground, and then stood over him with his face set, and his fist ready. Again Aisha laughed. It was well thrown, my guest. Thou hast a strong arm for one who so late was sick. But now out of thy courtesy I pray thee let that man live, and do my bidding. He shall not harm the girl. The night air grows chill, and I would welcome her in mine own place. Surely she whom thou dost favor shall be favored of me also. I took Leo by the arm, and pulled him from the prostrate mute, and he, half bewildered, obeyed the pressure. Then we all set out for the cave across the plateau, where a pile of white human ashes was all that remained of the fire that had lit the dancing, for the dancers had vanished. In due course we gained Aisha's boudoir. All too soon, it seemed to me, having a sad presage of what was to come lying heavy on my heart. Aisha seated herself upon her cushions, and having dismissed Job and Bilali, by signs bade the mutes tend the lamps and retire, all save one girl, who was her favorite personal attendant. We three remained standing, the unfortunate Ustane a little to the left of the rest of us. Now, O Holly, Aisha began, how came it that thou who didst hear my words bidding this evildoer, and she pointed to Ustane, to go hence, thou at whose prayer I did weakly spare her life, how came it, I say, that thou wast a sharer in what I saw tonight? Answer, and for thine own sake, I say, speak all the truth, for I am not minded to hear lies upon this matter. It was by accident, O Queen, I answered. I knew naught of it. I do believe thee, O Holly, she answered coldly, and well it is for thee that I do. Then does the whole guilt rest upon her? I do not find any guilt therein, broke in Leo. She is not another man's wife, and it appears that she has married me according to the custom of this awful place, so who is the worse? Anyway, madam, he went on, whatever she has done I have done too, so if she is to be punished let me be punished also, and I tell thee, he went on, working himself up into a fury, that if thou biddest one of those deaf and dumb villains to touch her again I will tear him to pieces. And he looked as though he meant it. Aisha listened in icy silence, and made no remark. When he had finished, however, she addressed Ustane. Hast thou aught to say, woman? Thou silly straw, thou feather, who didst think to float towards thy passion's petty ends, even against the great wind of my will? Tell me, for I fain would understand. Why didst thou this thing? And then I think I saw the most tremendous exhibition of moral courage and intrepidity that it is possible to conceive. For the poor doomed girl, knowing what she had to expect at the hands of her terrible queen, knowing too from bitter experience how great was her adversary's power, yet gathered herself together, and out of the very depths of her despair drew materials to defy her. I did it, O she answered, drawing herself up to the full of her stately height, and throwing back the panther skin from her head, because my love is stronger than the grave. I did it because my life without this man whom my heart chose would be but a living death. Therefore did I risk my life, and now that I know that it is forfeit to thine anger, yet am I glad that I did risk it, and pay it away in the risking, because he embraced me once, and told me that he loved me yet. Here Aisha half rose from her couch, and then sank down again. I have no magic, went on Ustane, her rich voice ringing strong and full, and I am not a queen, nor do I live forever, but a woman's heart is heavy to sink through waters, however deep, O Queen, and a woman's eyes are quick to see, even through thy veil, O Queen. Listen, I know it, thou dost love this man thyself, and therefore wouldst thou destroy me who stand across thy path. I die, and go into the darkness, nor know I whither I go. But this I know, there is a light shining in my breast, and by that light, as by a lamp, I see the truth, and the future that I shall not share unroll itself before me like a scroll. When first I knew my lord, and she pointed to Leo, I knew also that death would be the bridal gift he gave me. It rushed upon me of a sudden, but I turned not back, being ready to pay the price, and behold, death is here. And now, even as I knew that, so do I, standing on the steps of doom, know that thou shalt not reap the profit of thy crime. Mine he is, and though thy beauty shine like a sun among the stars, mine shall he remain for thee. Never here in this life shall he look thee in the eyes and call thee spouse. Thou too art doomed, I see. And her voice rang like the cry of an inspired prophetess. Ah, I see. Then came an answering cry of mingled rage and terror. I turned my head. Aisha had risen, and was standing with her outstretched hand pointing at Ustane, who had suddenly stopped speaking. I gazed at the poor woman, and as I gazed there came upon her face that same woeful, fixed expression of terror that I had seen once before when she had broken out into her wild chant. Her eyes grew large, her nostrils dilated, and her lips blanched. Aisha said nothing. She made no sound. She only drew herself up, stretched out her arm, and her tall veiled frame, quivering like an aspen leaf, appeared to look fixedly at her victim. Even as she did so, Ustane put her hands to her head, uttered one piercing scream, turned round twice, and then fell backwards with a thud, prone upon the floor. Both Leo and myself rushed to her. She was stone dead, blasted into death by some mysterious electric agency or overwhelming will force whereof the dread she had command. For a moment Leo did not quite realize what had happened. But when he did, his face was awful to see. With a savage oath he rose from beside the corpse, and turning, literally sprang at Aisha. But she was watching, and seeing him come, stretched out her hand again. And he went staggering back towards me, and would have fallen, had I not caught him. Afterwards he told me that he felt as though he had suddenly received a violent blow in the chest, and what is more, utterly cowed, as if all the manhood had been taken out of him. Then Aisha spoke. "Forgive me, my guest," she said softly, addressing him, "if I have shocked thee with my justice." "Forgive thee, thou fiend," roared poor Leo, wringing his hands in his rage and grief. "Forgive thee, thou murderess. By heaven, I will kill thee if I can." "Nay, nay," she answered in the same soft voice. "Thou dost not understand. The time has come for thee to learn. Thou art my love, my Callicrates, my beautiful, my strong. For 2,000 years, Callicrates, have I waited for thee, and now at length thou hast come back to me. And as for this woman," pointing to the corpse, "she stood between me and thee, and therefore have I laid her in the dust, Callicrates." "It is an accursed lie," said Leo. "My name is not Callicrates. I am Leo Vinci. My ancestor was Callicrates, at least I believe he was." "Ah, thou sayest it. Thine ancestor was Callicrates, and thou, even thou, art Callicrates reborn, come back, and mine own dear lord. I am not Callicrates, and as for being thy lord, or having aught to do with thee, I had sooner be the lord of a fiend from hell, for she would be better than thou." Sayest thou so, Callicrates? "Nay, but thou hast not seen me for so long a time that no memory remains. Yet am I very fair, Callicrates. I hate thee, murderess, and I have no wish to see thee. What is it to me how fair thou art? I hate thee, I say. Yet within a very little space shalt thou creep to my knee, and swear that thou dost love me," answered Aisha, with a sweet, mocking laugh. "Come, there is no time like the present time. Here before this dead girl who loved thee, let us put it to the proof. Look now on me, Callicrates." And with a sudden motion she shook her gauzy covering from her, and stood forth in her low kirtle and her snaky zone, in her glorious radiant beauty and her imperial grace, rising from her wrappings, as it were, like Venus from the wave, or Galatea from her marble, or a beatified spirit from the tomb. She stood forth, and fixed her deep and glowing eyes upon Leo's eyes, and I saw his clenched fists unclasp, and his set and quivering features relax beneath her gaze. I saw his wonder and astonishment grow into admiration, and then into fascination, and the more he struggled the more I saw the power of her dread beauty fasten on him, and take possession of his senses, drugging them, and drawing the heart out of him. Did I not know the process? Had not I, who was twice his age, gone through it myself? Was I not going through it afresh even then, although her sweet and passionate gaze was not for me? Yes, alas, I was. Alas, that I should have to confess that at that very moment I was rent by mad and furious jealousy. I could have flown at him, shame upon me. The woman had confounded and almost destroyed my moral sense, as she was bound to confound all who looked upon her superhuman loveliness. But I do not quite know how. I got the better of myself, and once more turned to see the climax of the tragedy. "Oh, great heaven!" gasped Leo. "Art thou a woman?" "A woman in truth, in very truth, and thine own spouse, Callicrates," she answered, stretching out her rounded ivory arms towards him, and smiling, ah, so sweetly. He looked, and slowly I perceived that he was drawing nearer to her. Suddenly his eye fell upon the corpse of poor Ustane, and he shuddered and stopped. "How can I?" he said hoarsely. "Thou art a murderess, she loved me." Observe, he was already forgetting that he had loved her. "It is not," she murmured, and her voice sounded sweet as the night wind passing through the trees. "It is not at all. If I have sinned, let my beauty answer for my sin. If I have sinned, it is for love of thee. Let my sin, therefore, be put away and forgotten. And once more she stretched out her arms and whispered, "Come." And then in another few seconds it was all over. I saw him struggle. I saw him even turn to fly. But her eyes drew him more strongly than iron bonds, and the magic of her beauty and concentrated will and passion entered into him and overpowered him. Even there, in the presence of the body of the woman who had loved him well enough to die for him. It sounds horrible and wicked enough, but he should not be too greatly blamed, and be sure his sin will find him out. The temptress who drew him into evil was more than human, and her beauty was greater than the loveliness of the daughters of men. I looked up again, and now her perfect form lay in his arms, and her lips were pressed against his own. And thus, with the corpse of his dead love for an altar, did Leo Vinci plight his troth to her red-handed murderess, plight it for ever and a day. For those who sell themselves into a like dominion, paying down the price of their own honor, and throwing their soul into the balance to sink the scale to the level of their lusts, can hope for no deliverance here or hereafter. As they have sown, so shall they reap and reap, even when the poppy flowers of passion have withered in their hands, and their harvest is but bitter tares, garnered in satiety. Suddenly, with a snake-like motion, she seemed to slip from his embrace, and then again broke out into her low laugh of triumphant mockery. Did I not tell thee that within a little space thou wouldst creep to my knee, O Callicrates? And surely the space has not been a great one. Leo groaned in shame and misery, for though he was overcome and stricken down, he was not so lost as to be unaware of the depth of the degradation to which he had sunk. On the contrary, his better nature rose up in arms against his fallen self, as I saw clearly enough later on. Aisha laughed again, and then quickly veiled herself, and made a sign to the girl mute, who had been watching the whole scene with curious startled eyes. The girl left, and presently returned, followed by 2 male mutes, to whom the queen made another sign. Thereon they all 3 seized the body of poor Ustane by the arms, and dragged it heavily down the cavern, and away through the curtains at the end. Leo watched it for a little while, and then covered his eyes with his hand, and it too, to my excited fancy, seemed to watch us as it went. "Their past is the dead past," said Aisha, solemnly, as the curtains shook and fell back into their places, when the ghastly procession had vanished behind them. And then, with one of those extraordinary transitions of which I have already spoken, she again threw off her veil, and broke out, after the ancient and poetic fashion of the dwellers in Arabia, one into a paean of triumph or epithalamium, which, wild and beautiful as it was, is exceedingly difficult to render into English, and ought by rights to be sung to the music of a cantata, rather than written and read. It was divided into 2 parts, one descriptive or definitive, and the other personal, and as nearly as I can remember, ran as follows. 1. Among the ancient Arabians the power of poetic declamation, either in verse or prose, was held in the highest honor and esteem, and he who excelled in it was known as kateb, or orator. Every year a general assembly was held at which the rival poets repeated their compositions, when those poems which were judged to be the best were, so soon as the knowledge and the art of writing became general, inscribed on silken letters of gold, and publicly exhibited, being known as al-modahabat, or golden verses. In the poem given above by Mr. Hawley, Aisha evidently followed the traditional poetic manner of her people, which was to embody their thoughts in a series of somewhat disconnected sentences, each remarkable for its beauty and the grace of its expression. Editor. Love is like a flower in the desert. It is like the aloe of Arabia that blooms but once and dies. It blooms in the salt emptiness of life, and the brightness of its beauty is set upon the waste as a star is set upon a storm. It hath the sun above that is the spirit, and above it blows the air of its divinity. At the echoing of a step, love blooms, I say love blooms, and bends her beauty down to him who passeth by. He plucketh it, he plucketh the red cup that is full of honey, and beareth it away, away across the desert, away till the flower be withered, away till the desert be done. There is only one perfect flower in the wilderness of life. That flower is love. There is only one fixed star in the midst of our wandering. That star is love. There is only one hope in our despairing night. That hope is love. All else is false. All else is shadow moving upon water. All else is wind and vanity. Who shall say what is the weight or the measure of love? It is born of the flesh, it dwelleth in the spirit. From each doth it draw its comfort. For beauty it is as a star. Many are its shapes, but all are beautiful, and none know where the star rose, or the horizon where it shall set. Then turning to Leo, and laying her hand upon his shoulder, she went on in a fuller and more triumphant tone, speaking in balanced sentences that gradually grew and swelled from idealized prose into pure and majestic verse. Long have I loved thee, O my love, yet has my love not lessened. Long have I waited for thee, and behold my reward is at hand, is here. Far away I saw thee once, and thou wast taken from me. Then in a grave sowed I the seed of patience, and shone upon it with the sun of hope, and watered it with tears of repentance, and breathed on it with the breath of my knowledge. And now lo, it hath sprung up, and borne fruit. Lo, out of the grave hath it sprung. Yea, from among the dry bones and ashes of the dead. I have waited and my reward is with me. I have overcome death, and death brought back to me him that was dead. Therefore do I rejoice, for fair is the future. Green are the paths that we shall tread across the everlasting meadows. The hour is at hand. Night hath fled away into the valleys. The dawn kisseth the mountain tops. Soft shall we live, my love, and easy shall we go. Crowned shall we be with the diadem of kings. Worshipping and wonder-struck all peoples of the world. Blinded shall fall before our beauty and might. From time unto time shall our greatness thunder on, rolling like a chariot through the dust of endless days. Laughing shall we speed in our victory and pomp, laughing like the daylight as he leaps along the hills. Onward, still triumphant to a triumph ever new. Onward, in our power to a power unattained. Onward, never weary, clad with splendor for a robe, till accomplished be our fate, and the night is rushing down. She paused in her strange and most thrilling allegorical chant, of which I am, unfortunately, only able to give the burden, and that feebly enough, and then said, Perchance thou dost not believe my word, Callicrates. Perchance thou thinkest that I do delude thee, and that I have not lived these many years, and that thou hast not been born again to me. Nay, look not so, put away that pale cast of doubt, for oh be sure herein can error find no foothold. Sooner shall the suns forget their course and the swallow miss her nest, than my soul shall swear a lie and be led astray from thee, Callicrates. Blind me, take away mine eyes, and let the darkness utterly fence me in, and still mine ears would catch the tone of thy unforgotten voice, striking more loud against the portals of my sense than can the call of brazen-throated clarions. Stop up mine hearing also, and let 1,000 touch me on the brow, and I would name thee out of all. Yea, rob me of every sense, and see me stand deaf and blind and dumb, and with nerves that cannot weigh the value of a touch. Yet would my spirit leap within me like a quickening child and cry unto my heart, Behold, Callicrates! Behold, thou watcher, the watches of thy night are ended. Behold, thou who seekest in the night season, thy morning star Ariseth. She paused a while and then continued, But stay, if thy heart is yet hardened against the mighty truth, and thou dost require a further pledge of that which thou dost find too deep to understand, even now shall it be given to thee, and to thee also, O my Holly. Bear each one of you a lamp, and follow after me whither I shall lead you. Without stopping to think, indeed, speaking for myself, I had almost abandoned the function and circumstances under which to think seemed to be absolutely useless, since thought fell hourly helpless against a black wall of wonder. We took the lamps and followed her. Going to the end of her boudoir, she raised a curtain and revealed a little stair of the sort that is so common in these dim caves of Kor. As we hurried down the stair, I observed that the steps were worn in the center to such an extent that some of them had been reduced from 7½ inches, at which I guessed their original height, to about 3½ Now, all the other steps that I had seen in the caves were practically unworn, as was to be expected, seeing that the only traffic which ever passed upon them was that of those who bore a fresh burden to the tomb. Therefore this fact struck my notice with that curious force with which little things do strike us when our minds are absolutely overwhelmed by a sudden rush of powerful sensations, beaten flat, as it were, like a sea beneath the first burst of a hurricane, so that every little object on the surface starts into an unnatural prominence. At the bottom of the staircase I stood and stared at the worn steps, and Aisha, turning, saw me. Wonderest thou whose are the feet that have worn away the rock, my Holly? She asked. They are mine, even mine own light feet. I can remember when those stairs were fresh and level, but for 2,000 years and more have I gone down hither day by day, and see, my sandals have worn out the solid rock. I made no answer, but I do not think that anything that I had heard or seen brought home to my limited understanding so clear a sense of this being's overwhelming antiquity, as that hard rock hollowed out by her soft white feet. How many hundreds of thousands of times must she have passed up and down that stair to bring about such a result? The stair led to a tunnel, and a few paces down the tunnel was one of the usual curtain-hung doorways, a glance at which told me that it was the same where I had been a witness of that terrible scene by the leaping flame. I recognized the pattern of the curtain, and the sight of it brought the whole event vividly before my eyes, and made me tremble even at its memory. Aisha entered the tomb, for it was a tomb, and we followed her. I, for one, rejoicing that the mystery of the place was about to be cleared up, and yet afraid to face its solution.